Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of horror stories that you can listen to while you fall asleep. Before the video begins, let us know what time is it, and where you are listening from. Also, if you have suggestion for next horror story settings, let us know in the comments. Now let's begin. I still get cold sweats thinking about March 15th. That was the night I learned that working remote tech support for a hospital system could be more terrifying than any slasher movie. I was 3 months into the graveyard shift, monitoring server alerts from my cramped apartment. The pay was decent, and I liked the isolation. No office politics, no small talk, just me and the glowing screens in my darkened room. The work was simple enough. Watch for system failures, escalate critical alerts, keep the hospital networks running while patients slept. That Tuesday started like any other. Rain drummed against my windows as I settled in with coffee and energy drinks. The first few hours passed quietly, just routine maintenance notifications and the occasional server hiccup. Around 2 a.m., when the building was dead silent except for my neighbor's television bleeding through the thin walls, the first strange alert popped up. It was from St. Mary's cardiac wing. Nothing critical, just an unusual data transfer that lasted longer than normal. I made a note and moved on. 20 minutes later, another one. Same wing, different server. Then another. By 3 a.m., I was seeing patterns that made my stomach knot. Someone was accessing patient files in the cardiac intensive care unit, but not through normal channels. The timestamps showed continuous activity, but when I checked the login records, no staff members were logged into those systems. I called my supervisor, Marcus, but got voicemail. Protocol said to escalate unusual network activity, especially in critical care units. I tried the hospital's night security desk. No answer there either. The rain had stopped, and my apartment felt suffocatingly quiet. I could hear my own breathing, the hum of my computer fans, the distant tick of my kitchen clock. That's when I noticed something that made my hands shake. The data being accessed wasn't random. Someone was pulling files for patients who had died in the cardiac wing over the past 6 months. One by one, methodically, like they were building a list. I grabbed my phone to call the hospital directly, but then I saw something that made me freeze. A new alert had popped up, and this one showed voice recordings being accessed from the hospital's communication system. Internal calls, staff conversations, patient interactions, all from the cardiac wing, all from the same time period as those deceased patients. My throat felt dry as sandpaper. I pulled up the audio access logs, expecting to see some kind of technical glitch. Instead, I found something impossible. The voice recordings were being played back in real time. Someone was listening to conversations between doctors and nurses from months ago, calls about patients who were now dead. But here's what made me want to vomit. The playback logs showed that these recordings were being accessed from inside my own apartment. I spun around, scanning my dark living room. Nothing, just shadows and the blue glow from my monitors. But according to the system logs, someone in this exact location was listening to those conversations right now. I pulled up the real-time audio monitoring tool, something I'd never had reason to use before. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. The interface loaded, showing active audio streams from the hospital network. There it was, an active connection streaming audio from St. Mary's cardiac wing to my IP address. But I wasn't listening to anything. My speakers were off. I had headphones around my neck, but they weren't plugged in. That's when I heard it. A voice, barely audible, coming from somewhere in my apartment. A woman's voice, professional, clinical. A nurse discussing medication dosages with a doctor. But this conversation was from October, according to the logs. I'd been living here since January. I followed the sound, my heart hammering against my ribs. It seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, or maybe the vents. The voice was talking about a patient named Robert Chin, 62 years old, admitted with chest pains. I checked the records. Robert Chin had died 3 days after that recorded conversation. The voice stopped abruptly. My apartment fell silent again, except for that relentless kitchen clock and my ragged breathing. I sat back down at my computer, hands trembling as I tried to figure out what was happening. Then I saw the final alert that made everything click into place. Someone had accessed my personal employee file. Not just accessed it, but cross-referenced it with hospital security footage, building access logs, and most disturbing of all, the apartment rental records for my building. My address was now in a database alongside those deceased patients. My work schedule, my personal information, my daily routines, all compiled and stored in the same system that someone was using to research dead cardiac patients and listen to their final medical conversations. I grabbed my jacket and keys, ready to leave, when my computer chimed with an incoming message. Internal company chat. From Marcus, my supervisor. Working late tonight, I see. Don't worry, we're keeping an eye on things. But Marcus had been offline for hours. I'd called him at 3 a.m. and gotten voicemail. I checked his status. Still showing as offline. Another message appeared. Your apartment has excellent acoustics. Audio monitoring systems work very well there. My blood turned to ice water. I looked around my living room again, really looked this time. That's when I noticed the small holes drilled into the corners of the walls, barely visible in the shadow behind my bookshelf. Fresh holes, with tiny black devices nestled inside them. Someone had been in my apartment. Someone was listening to everything I did, said breathed, and they had access to the hospital systems I was supposed to be monitoring. I ran to my door, but then I heard the worst sound imaginable. My own voice, played back through those hidden speakers, having the exact conversation I had just had with Marcus. But the recording was time-stamped 3 hours in the future. As I write this, I'm sitting in a 24-hour diner across town, using their Wi-Fi. I've been here for 6 hours, afraid to go home. I called the police, but how do you explain that someone is predicting your conversations and bugging your apartment through a hospital computer system? I keep thinking about those dead cardiac patients, about someone methodically researching their final days, listening to their last medical conversations, about how my personal information is now filed alongside theirs. The worst part? I just checked my work email on this public computer. There's a new assignment waiting for me. A different hospital system to monitor, a different night shift position. And the apartment they've arranged for me is already equipped with excellent acoustic monitoring capabilities. I think I'm going to be hearing my own voice again very soon. I need to tell someone about what happened during my night shift last month. Maybe if I say it out loud, it will stop replaying in my head every time I close my eyes. I work remote customer service for a major electronics company. Third shift, midnight to 8 a.m., handling warranty claims and technical support. The pay is decent, and I like working alone from my studio apartment. No traffic, no coworkers breathing down my neck, just me and my headset in the blue glow of my computer screen. November 8th started like any other Tuesday night. I had my usual setup, coffee, energy drinks, a playlist of ambient music to keep me alert during the dead hours. The first few calls were routine. Broken phones, faulty chargers, customers wanting refunds. Standard stuff that I could handle half asleep. Around 2:30 a.m., when the call volume usually drops to almost nothing, I got a call that made my skin crawl from the very first word. Hello, Sarah. The voice was calm, measured, like someone reading from a script. But here's the thing that made my stomach drop. He knew my name. Our system shows customers a generic greeting with no agent names. We're trained never to give our real names to callers. Good evening. How can I help you today? I responded, following protocol, but my hands were already shaking as I pulled up the caller information screen. The account showed nothing. No name, no address, no purchase history. Just a phone number that, when I tried to trace it, came back as invalid. I've been watching your performance metrics, Sarah. Very impressive. 96% customer satisfaction rating. You really care about helping people, don't you? My mouth went dry. Performance metrics are internal information. No customer should have access to that data. I started to tell him I needed to transfer him to a supervisor, but he cut me off. I know you live at 1247 Oak Street, apartment 3B. I know you graduated from State University with a degree in communications. I know you have a small scar on your left hand from when you cut yourself making dinner last week. I looked down at my left hand. There was indeed a small bandage covering a cut from when I'd sliced my finger with a kitchen knife. But how could he possibly know that? Sir, I'm going to have to end this call if you continue with inappropriate comments. Sarah, look at your window. My blood turned to ice. My apartment is on the 3rd floor, facing the back parking lot. There's no way anyone could see into my windows without being right outside them. But against every instinct screaming at me not to, I turned toward the window. There was a light in the parking lot. A single flashlight beam pointed directly at my window. It moved in a slow circle, then clicked off. "Do you see me now, Sarah?" I dropped my headset and ran to the window. The parking lot was empty except for the usual scattered cars. No people, no movement, just the dim yellow glow from the security lights. But I knew what I had seen. When I got back to my desk, the call was still connected. I could hear breathing through my speakers. "Who are you?" I whispered into my microphone. "I'm someone who appreciates good customer service. You've been helping me for months now, Sarah, even though you don't remember. Every call, every warranty claim, every technical question. You've been so helpful." I pulled up my call history, searching for any previous interactions with this number. Nothing. The system showed this as a first-time caller. "I don't understand." "Check your personal email, Sarah." With trembling fingers, I opened my personal Gmail account on my phone. There, in my inbox, were dozens of emails I'd never seen before. All from addresses I didn't recognize, but all containing detailed information about me. Photos of me walking to the grocery store. Screenshots of my social media posts. My work schedule. My daily routines. The subject lines made me want to vomit. Sarah's morning coffee run, November 7th. Sarah's favorite parking spot. Sarah working late again. I've been documenting your life, Sarah. Every detail. Every habit. You're such a creature of routine. It makes things so much easier. What do you want? My voice was barely audible. "I want you to quit your job." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "Quit your job, Sarah. Right now. Log out of your system, pack your things, and walk away. Move to a different city. Change your phone number. Disappear." I can't just. "Sarah, look at your kitchen table." My apartment is small enough that I could see the kitchen table from my desk. There, sitting in the center where I was absolutely certain nothing had been before, was a manila envelope. I knew I should call the police. I knew I should hang up and run. But something about his voice, so calm and reasonable, made me walk to the kitchen like I was in a trance. Inside the envelope were photographs. Dozens of them. All of me, taken through my windows, in the parking lot, at the grocery store, at the gas station. But what made me collapse into my kitchen chair was the final photograph. It was a picture of me sleeping, in my own bed. The timestamp showed it was taken last night. "You have beautiful dreams, Sarah. You smile in your sleep sometimes. Did you know that?" I ran to my bedroom and checked the window. The lock was secure, but when I looked closer, I could see tiny scratches around the frame. Someone had been inside my apartment. Someone had stood next to my bed while I slept and taken photographs. "The police can't help you, Sarah. I haven't technically committed any crime. No threats, no violence, just admiration for your excellent customer service skills. But I think we both know this arrangement isn't sustainable." I stumbled back to my computer, my legs barely supporting me. The call timer showed we'd been connected for 27 minutes. The longest customer service call of my career, and the most terrifying 27 minutes of my life. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you helped me once, Sarah. A long time ago, and I never forgot your kindness. But kindness can be dangerous when it attracts the wrong kind of attention." I thought about all the calls I'd taken over the past year. Thousands of customers, thousands of voices blending together in my memory. But I couldn't recall anyone who would do this. "I'm going to give you a choice, Sarah. You can quit your job tonight and disappear, start over somewhere new. Or you can stay, and we can continue getting to know each other better. Much better." As he spoke, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was a photo of my apartment building, taken from the parking lot. But this one was live. I could see my own silhouette in the window, phone in hand. "Decide now, Sarah." I looked around my apartment at the life I'd built here. My books, my furniture, my carefully organized workspace. Everything I'd worked for over the past 3 years. Then I looked at those photographs again. At the evidence that someone had been inside my home while I slept. At the dozens of emails documenting my every move. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, I'll quit. Smart choice, Sarah. Log out of your system. Pack only what you need. Leave tonight." My hands moved automatically, closing my customer service applications, ending my shift early for the first time in 2 years. I felt like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. There's a bus station 12 miles north of town. The 6:15 a.m. bus goes to Chicago. From there, you can go anywhere. Start fresh. New name, new job, new life. I packed a single suitcase with clothes and essential documents. Everything else I left behind. My books, my dishes, my carefully curated life, all abandoned in 20 minutes. Sarah? His voice was still there, still calm, still reasonable. Yes. Thank you for your excellent customer service. It's been a pleasure doing business with you. The line went dead. I drove to the bus station as the sun was rising, checking my mirrors every few seconds for headlights that might be following me. At 6:15 a.m., I boarded a bus to Chicago with nothing but a suitcase and $700 in cash. That was 6 weeks ago. I'm in Portland now, working at a coffee shop, paying rent week to week in a furnished room. I've changed my hair, lost weight from stress, started going by my middle name instead of Sarah. But yesterday, a customer at the coffee shop smiled at me and said, "You have excellent customer service skills. You really care about helping people, don't you?" My hand started shaking so badly I dropped his coffee cup. I'm looking at bus schedules again tonight. I never believed in intuition until I started working security at the Meridian Corporate Center. Now I know that sometimes your gut knows things your brain hasn't figured out yet. The job seemed perfect when I started 3 months ago. Overnight security guard, decent pay, mostly just walking empty hallways and monitoring cameras. The building housed various businesses, accounting firms, law offices, marketing companies. During the day it buzzed with activity, but at night it belonged to me. My shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The first few weeks were peaceful. I'd make my rounds every 2 hours, check that doors were locked, ensure no one was working late without authorization. The building had that familiar corporate smell, carpet cleaner, coffee, and the faint ozone scent from copy machines. The 20th floor was always my favorite. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the entire city, comfortable leather chairs in the waiting area, and somehow the air felt cleaner up there. I'd often take my dinner break at the reception desk, watching the city lights twinkle below. That's where I first noticed something was wrong. It was during my second month, around 2 a.m. on a Thursday. I was eating a sandwich at the 20th floor reception desk when I realized I could hear typing. Soft, rhythmic clicking coming from one of the offices down the hall. But according to my logs, the building was empty except for me. I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward the sound. The typing stopped the moment I moved. I checked every office on the floor. All empty, all computers turned off, all doors locked exactly as they should be. I convinced myself it was just the building settling, maybe pipes or electrical systems making noise. Old buildings make sounds. That's what I told myself. But over the next week, it happened 3 more times. Always around 2 a.m. Always the sound of typing that would stop the moment I investigated. And always on the 20th floor. I started paying closer attention to the security cameras during my rounds. The building had dozens of them, covering every hallway, elevator, and entrance. I could review footage from my security desk in the lobby, watching feeds from any camera in real time or reviewing recordings from earlier. That's when I discovered something that made my hands shake. On Tuesday night, while reviewing footage from the 20th floor, I saw myself. There I was on camera, clear as day, walking down the hallway at 2:17 a.m. The timestamp matched perfectly with when I'd gone to investigate the typing sounds. But here's what made my blood run cold. I was walking with someone else. The figure beside me was tall, wearing a dark suit, keeping pace with me step for step. On camera, it looked like we were having a conversation, though I remembered walking alone in complete silence. I rewound the footage and watched it again. There I was clearly visible, walking and apparently talking with someone who I absolutely could not see in person, someone I had no memory of encountering. I checked the other camera angles from that night. Every single camera showed the same thing, me walking with a companion through the hallways, stopping at offices, appearing to listen to something or someone I couldn't see. But the most disturbing part was watching my own body language on the recordings. I looked comfortable, familiar with this invisible presence. Like we'd done this routine many times before. I started staying in the lobby during my shifts, avoiding the upper floors altogether. But the typing sounds followed me. I'd hear them coming through the elevator shaft, echoing down from somewhere high in the building. Always that same rhythmic clicking, always stopping when I paid attention to it. After a week of hiding in the lobby, I forced myself to investigate properly. I brought a digital recorder and decided to document whatever was happening on the 20th floor. At 2 a.m. sharp, I took the elevator up. The doors opened to the familiar hallway, dimly lit by emergency lighting. I could hear the typing immediately, coming from the corner office at the end of the hall. I walked slowly, recorder in one hand, flashlight in the other, calling out to anyone who might be there. No response, but the typing continued until I reached the office door. The nameplate read Dr. Elizabeth Chun, clinical psychologist. I tried the handle. Locked, just like always. But through the frosted glass, I could see light inside and the shadow of someone sitting at a desk. "Hello," I called out. "Building security. I need to check your authorization to be here after hours." The typing stopped. The light went out. When I shined my flashlight through the glass, the office was empty. I used my master key to enter. The office was small but comfortable, with diplomas on the wall, a patient chair facing a desk, and bookshelves lined with psychology texts. Everything was neat, professional, completely normal, except for the computer. It was an old desktop model, the kind businesses had phased out years ago. But it was warm, recently used, and when I touched the mouse, the screen came alive, showing a document that made me sick to my stomach. It was a psychological evaluation report about me. The document contained details about my behavior patterns, my work performance, my personal habits, even my childhood history that I'd never shared with anyone. Page after page of clinical observations written in the detached, professional language of a psychiatric evaluation. But the worst part was the conclusion. Subject demonstrates classic symptoms of dissociative episodes during night shift duties. Recommend immediate intervention before behavioral deterioration progresses further. I scrolled through the document, reading assessment notes dated over the past 2 months. Every strange incident I'd experienced was documented here, but from the perspective of someone watching me, studying me, analyzing my reactions. He speaks to voices only he can hear during his 2 a.m. rounds. Shows signs of memory gaps regarding his interactions with staff members. Exhibits paranoid behavior when reviewing security footage. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely use the mouse. I tried to save the document, to print it, to find some way to prove what I was seeing. But when I clicked save, an error message appeared. Access denied. File does not exist. I tried again. Same message. I refreshed the screen, and the document vanished completely, replaced by a standard desktop background. The computer showed no recent files, no browser history, no evidence that anyone had been using it. But it was still warm. The keyboard still showed the slight impressions on the keys that fingers leave behind. I ran back to the elevator, jabbing the lobby button repeatedly. During the ride down, I played back my digital recording, desperate to hear proof of the typing, of voices, of anything that would confirm I wasn't losing my mind. The recording was 42 minutes of complete silence. Not even my own footsteps or voice calling out in the hallway. Just dead silence, as if the recorder had been turned off the entire time. When I got back to the lobby, I immediately pulled up the security footage from the 20th floor. There I was on camera, walking through the hallways, stopping at Dr. Chen's office, entering with my key. But I was alone. No mysterious figure walking beside me this time. Just me talking animatedly to empty air, gesturing at invisible people, having conversations with no one. On the recording, I looked exactly like someone experiencing a complete psychological breakdown. I called my supervisor and requested immediate backup, claiming a medical emergency. When the relief guard arrived, I tried to explain what had happened, but hearing myself describe it out loud made me realize how insane it sounded. Invisible people, phantom typing, psychological reports that disappeared, conversations with no one. The relief guard listened patiently and suggested I might want to take a few days off, maybe see a doctor. I went home and spent the next 3 days researching the building's history. What I found made everything worse. Dr. Elizabeth Chun had been a tenant in the building for 8 years. Her practice specialized in treating people with dissociative disorders, particularly those who experienced workplace stress and night shift psychological issues. She'd written several papers about security guards who developed paranoid delusions during long periods of isolation. Dr. Chun had died 6 months ago. Heart attack in her office during evening hours. Her practice had been closed ever since, her office standing empty. But according to the building records, someone had been paying rent on that office every month since her death. The payments came from an account registered to Night Shift Psychological Services. I never went back to work. I called in sick for a week, then finally submitted my resignation by email. My supervisor seemed relieved, mentioning that they'd received several complaints from daytime tenants about the night security guard acting strangely, talking to himself in the hallways, appearing agitated during routine interactions. Complaints I had no memory of. I'm working day shift now at a small retail store. Normal hours, plenty of coworkers around, no long periods of isolation. I thought I was getting better. But last week, I found something in my mailbox that made my world tilt sideways. It was a bill for psychological services. 40 sessions with Dr. Elizabeth Chun, billed to my insurance, scheduled for every night I'd worked at the Meridian building. According to the billing records, I'd been receiving treatment for dissociative identity disorder. The sessions had been helping, the notes said. I was making excellent progress. Treatment would resume as soon as I was ready to return to night shift work. I've been staring at this blank document for 3 hours, trying to figure out how to explain what happened during my remote data entry job without sounding completely insane. But I need to get this out before I lose my nerve, before I convince myself it was all just stress and sleep deprivation. My name is Jessica, and until 2 weeks ago, I worked night shift data entry for a company called Meridian Solutions. Remote work, midnight to 8 a.m., processing insurance claims and medical records. The pay was surprisingly good for mindless typing, and I liked working from home in my pajamas while the rest of the world slept. The job was simple enough. I'd log into their secure system, and batches of scanned documents would appear on my screen. Handwritten forms, medical charts, accident reports, insurance applications. My job was to type everything into standardized digital formats. Names, dates, addresses, medical conditions, claim amounts. Thousands of documents every night, processed and filed into their database. I'd been doing it for 8 months when I started noticing patterns in the documents that made my skin crawl. It began in October. I was halfway through my shift, typing up a car accident report from someone named Michael Torres, when I realized I'd seen his name before. Not just once, but multiple times over the past few weeks. Different accidents, different dates, but always the same Michael Torres with the same address and social security number. At first, I figured it was just a coincidence. Some people are unlucky, right? But as I kept working, I started paying closer attention to the names and details I was processing. Sarah Kim had filed 17 different insurance claims in the past month. House fire, car theft, medical emergency, workplace injury, another car accident. All different insurance companies, all legitimate-looking paperwork, but all the same Sarah Kim. David Chin appeared in my queue almost nightly. Sometimes as a patient in medical records, sometimes as a witness in accident reports, sometimes as a claimant in disability forms. I started keeping a notebook, jotting down names and details that seemed familiar. By November, my notebook contained over 200 names that appeared repeatedly across different types of documents. People who seemed to exist only in insurance paperwork, filing claims, having accidents, getting injured, dying, and then mysteriously appearing alive in new documents weeks later. The strangest part was how detailed the information was. These weren't just names and numbers. The medical records contained complete patient histories, detailed descriptions of injuries, comprehensive treatment plans. The accident reports included witness statements, police notes, detailed damage assessments. Someone was creating an enormous fictional universe of insurance fraud, and I was typing it all into official databases. I tried bringing this up with my supervisor, Marcus, during our weekly video call. I explained that I was seeing duplicate names and potentially fraudulent documents. He listened patiently, then told me that data entry workers weren't supposed to analyze the content, just type what they see. He reminded me that I'd signed extensive confidentiality agreements, and that questioning the legitimacy of documents could result in termination. But I couldn't stop noticing things. In December, I started recognizing addresses. The same apartment buildings, the same street addresses appearing in documents for different people. I looked up some of these locations on Google Maps. Half of them didn't exist. The other half were vacant lots, abandoned buildings, or businesses that had been closed for years. Then I started recognizing medical conditions. Rare diseases and injuries described in identical language across different patients' files. Copy and paste descriptions of symptoms, treatments, and prognosis. Like someone was using a template to create fake medical histories. The breaking point came on December 15th, during what should have been a routine night of data entry. I was processing a batch of life insurance claims when I saw a document that made me drop my coffee mug. It was a death certificate for Jessica Marie Whitman. My full name, my date of birth, my social security number. According to the document, I had died 3 days earlier in a car accident. The death certificate was signed by a Dr. Robert Harrison, filed with the State Vital Records Office, and attached to a life insurance claim for $50,000. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely use my mouse. I screenshotted the document, saved it to my desktop, and then kept reading. The claim was being filed by my next of kin, listed as my sister Amanda. I don't have a sister named Amanda. I don't have any siblings at all. But there it was, in official-looking paperwork. Amanda Whitman requesting a $50,000 payout because her sister Jessica had died in a car accident. I tried to call Marcus immediately, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I tried the main company number, but got an automated message saying the offices were closed. I sent urgent emails explaining what I'd found, demanding an immediate explanation. While I waited for responses, I started digging deeper into the documents I'd been processing. I used the company's search function to look up other instances of my name, my address, my personal information. What I found made me want to vomit. Over the past 8 months, I had appeared in dozens of documents, sometimes as a patient receiving medical treatment for conditions I'd never had, sometimes as a witness to accidents I'd never seen, sometimes as a victim of crimes that had never happened to me. According to the files I'd been dutifully typing, I'd been in 6 car accidents, suffered 3 workplace injuries, been diagnosed with cancer twice, been robbed 4 times, and had my identity stolen on 7 separate occasions. Insurance companies had paid out hundreds of thousands of dollars in claims related to my fictional misfortunes. But here's the part that made everything infinitely worse. Some of the medical information was accurate. A document dated 3 months ago described me seeking treatment for chronic insomnia and anxiety related to working night shifts. I had never sought treatment for those issues, but they were real problems I'd been dealing with. Another document mentioned a small scar on my left knee from a childhood bicycle accident. That scar exists, but I'd never told anyone the story of how I got it. Someone had been watching me, documenting details about my life, and incorporating real information into fake insurance documents. I spent the rest of my shift searching through every document I could access, looking for more people I might recognize. That's when I found my neighbors. Mrs. Peterson from apartment 2B had supposedly died in a house fire last month, with her daughter collecting life insurance benefits. I'd seen Mrs. Peterson getting her mail just yesterday. The college student in 3A had filed disability claims for a back injury that left him unable to work, while I'd watched him moving furniture into his apartment last weekend. The entire building where I lived was represented in fraudulent insurance documents. We were all supposedly victims of various tragedies, all generating insurance payouts for relatives we'd never heard of. I grabbed my laptop and drove to the nearest 24-hour coffee shop, needing to get out of my apartment while I processed what I'd discovered. Using their Wi-Fi, I tried researching Meridian Solutions, the company I'd been working for. The company had no website, no business license I could find, no physical address. The phone numbers I had for them were all disconnected or went to voicemail boxes that were full. My paychecks had been direct deposits from a bank account registered to a company that didn't seem to exist. But I had been getting paid. Real money, deposited into my real bank account, for 8 months of typing fake documents. At 6 a.m., I got a text message from Marcus. "Thanks for bringing the discrepancies to our attention. We're conducting an internal investigation. Please continue with your regular duties tonight while we resolve this issue." I hadn't given him my personal phone number. I'd only communicated with the company through their secure messaging system and work email. But somehow he had my cell phone number and was texting me directly. I decided not to log in for my shift that night. Instead, I spent the evening trying to contact insurance companies, government agencies, anyone who might be able to explain how fake documents with my personal information were being processed through official channels. Most of the phone calls led nowhere. Customer service representatives told me they couldn't discuss specific claims without proper authorization. Government offices were closed or transferred me to voicemail systems that never returned my calls. But I did reach one person who made everything even more confusing. I called the insurance company that had supposedly processed my death claim. After being transferred 3 times, I reached a claims investigator named Janet Rodriguez. When I explained that I was Jessica Whitman and that I was very much alive despite the death certificate she'd processed, there was a long silence. "Ms. Whitman," she said finally, "we've been trying to reach you for weeks." "What do you mean?" "We've been investigating irregularities in your file. Multiple death certificates, conflicting medical records, claims submitted by people who can't be verified as your relatives. We flagged your case as potential identity theft over a month ago. So you know the documents are fake? We know something is wrong, but we can't figure out what. The documents all appear legitimate. They have proper signatures, official letterheads, valid reference numbers. They're being submitted through authorized channels by licensed medical professionals and legal representatives. But I'm alive. I've never filed these claims. That's what makes this so unusual. Usually identity theft involves someone stealing your information to file false claims. But in your case, the claims are being filed correctly, through proper channels, with documentation that appears authentic. It's as if someone has created an entire parallel version of your life for the purpose of generating insurance fraud. She paused, and I could hear typing in the background. "Ms. Whitman, can you tell me about your current employment?" I explained about the data entry job, about processing insurance documents, about discovering my own name in the files. Another long silence. "I need to ask you something, and please think carefully before you answer. Over the past 8 months, have you ever typed your own personal information into any work-related systems?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I thought back through months of mindless data entry, typing thousands of names and details into standardized forms. Had I ever typed my own name? My own address? My own social security number? I couldn't remember. After processing hundreds of documents every night, the names and numbers all blurred together. It was entirely possible that I had unknowingly typed my own information into insurance claim forms, medical records, death certificates. "I don't know," I whispered. "Ms. Whitman, I think you need to understand something. The documents you've been processing aren't just being entered into databases. They're being submitted as official claims to real insurance companies. Every document you type becomes a legal filing that generates financial payouts. Are you saying I've been helping someone commit fraud? I'm saying you might be the primary tool they're using to commit fraud. If you're the one typing the documents into official forms, then technically you're the one submitting the fraudulent claims." My laptop was still open beside me, showing the Meridian Solutions login screen. I'd been planning to log in and gather more evidence, but now I realized that every keystroke was potentially incriminating me further. What should I do? Don't log into that system again. Don't type another document. And you need to contact the FBI immediately. This sounds like organized insurance fraud on a massive scale, and you're right in the middle of it. I hung up and sat in the coffee shop until closing time, staring at my laptop screen. When I finally got home, there were 17 voicemail messages waiting for me. 13 were from Marcus, each one more urgent than the last. "Jessica, we need you to complete your shift tonight. The system is showing incomplete batches. Please log in immediately and finish your assigned work." 2 were from people claiming to be my relatives, asking about insurance settlements and inheritance paperwork. The last 2 were from law enforcement agencies asking me to call them regarding ongoing investigations. I didn't return any of the calls. The next morning, I found a manila envelope slipped under my apartment door. Inside were copies of every fraudulent document containing my information, along with a handwritten note. "We know this is confusing, Jessica. We can explain everything if you're willing to listen. Your work has been incredibly valuable to us, and we'd like to offer you a promotion to a new project. Much better pay, much more interesting work. Please log in tonight for a special assignment." The note was signed M, But there was something else at the bottom that made my blood freeze. A perfect reproduction of my own signature. I packed a bag and left my apartment that afternoon. I'm writing this from a motel 200 miles away, using a burner laptop I bought with cash. I've been here for 2 weeks, trying to figure out my next move. Yesterday, I received a text message from an unknown number. Hi Jessica. We miss having you on the team. Your replacement isn't nearly as good at data entry as you were. We'd love to have you back. New location, new identity, fresh start. Interested? I turned off the phone and threw it in a dumpster. But this morning, when I checked out of the motel, the desk clerk handed me a message that had been delivered for me. My new fake name, my current location, my room number. I need to document what happened during my time working remote IT support, because I'm starting to question my own memory. Writing it down might help me figure out what was real and what was something else entirely. My job was simple: overnight technical support for a network of small medical practices. Doctors, dentists, veterinarians, anyone who needed their computer systems running smoothly. I worked from home, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., answering support tickets and remote connecting to fix problems while their offices were closed. The company Tech Care Solutions specialized in healthcare IT. They gave me access to hundreds of medical practice networks, patient management systems, appointment scheduling software, everything these small offices needed to function. My job was to keep their systems running, update software, fix bugs, make sure patient data stayed secure. I loved the work at first. Quiet nights, technical puzzles to solve, decent pay, and the satisfaction of knowing I was helping healthcare providers serve their patients better. The problems were usually routine: printers offline, software updates gone wrong, network connectivity issues, user accounts that needed resetting. For the first 6 months, everything was exactly what I expected. I'd get maybe 10 to 15 tickets per night, spend an hour or 2 on each one, file my reports, and clock out at 6 a.m. feeling like I'd accomplished something meaningful. But sometime in March, the tickets started getting strange. The first weird one came from Dr. Patricia Morrison's dental practice in Ohio. The ticket said her patient management system was behaving oddly, but didn't specify the problem. When I remote connected to her network, everything looked normal. Patient records, appointment schedules, billing information, all exactly as it should be. But then I noticed something that made me pause. Dr. Morrison's schedule showed appointments for patients I recognized. Not personally, but from other tickets I'd worked on. Jennifer Walsh had an appointment for Tuesday at 2 p.m. I'd seen that name 3 days earlier when fixing a software issue at a veterinary clinic in Texas. Same spelling, same birth date listed in both systems. I figured it was just a common name, maybe a data entry error. But over the next week, I started noticing more overlapping names across different medical practices. Patients who apparently lived in multiple states, seeing doctors hundreds of miles apart for completely different types of medical care. By April, I was keeping a spreadsheet of names that appeared in multiple practice management systems. The list grew every night. Michael Torres was a patient at dental practices in 3 different states. Sarah Kim had veterinary records in California and medical records in Florida. David Chin appeared in patient databases from coast to coast. The strangest part was how detailed and consistent the information was. These weren't just duplicate names with different details. The birth dates matched, the addresses were similar, even the medical histories showed logical progression. Sarah Kim's California veterinary records showed her as a dog owner, and her Florida medical records mentioned pet allergies. Michael Torres had dental work in Ohio that corresponded with pain medication prescriptions in his Texas medical file. Someone was creating incredibly sophisticated fake patient records across hundreds of medical practices, and I was the only person with access to enough systems to notice the pattern. I tried discussing this with my supervisor, but Tech Care Solutions had a very hands-off management style. I rarely spoke to anyone during my shifts, just worked through tickets and submitted reports. When I finally reached my supervisor, Tom, during a scheduled check-in, he seemed uninterested in my concerns about duplicate patient records. "Focus on the technical issues," he told me. Patient information accuracy is the responsibility of individual practices. We just maintain the systems. But I couldn't stop noticing things. In May, I started recognizing patterns in the medical conditions and treatments. The same rare diseases appearing across multiple states, described in identical language. Identical medication prescriptions written by different doctors who supposedly had never communicated with each other. Treatment plans that were copy and pasted from one patient file to another with only minor details changed. Then I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Some of the patient records contained information about me. At first, it was subtle. A patient named Jessica Williams who shared my birthday. Someone with my middle name and similar address. But as I kept looking, the similarities became impossible to ignore. There was a Jessica Martinez in Dr. Chen's practice in Nevada whose medical history included chronic insomnia and computerized strain from extended screen time. I'd been dealing with both issues since starting the night shift job, but I'd never seen a doctor about them. A Jessica Thompson in a Florida practice had records showing anxiety medication prescribed after starting a new job that required overnight hours and isolation. The medication mentioned was exactly what my own doctor had prescribed 3 months earlier. But the record that made me physically sick was from a dental practice in Oregon. Jessica Reynolds, with my exact birth date and social security number, had comprehensive dental records, including x-rays and treatment notes that perfectly matched my own dental history. Fillings I'd gotten as a child, wisdom teeth removal from college, even a crown I'd had placed just last year. Someone was using my personal medical information to create fake patient records in medical databases across the country. I spent the rest of that week searching through every system I had access to, looking for more instances of my information. What I found was terrifying in its scope and detail. My medical history had been distributed across dozens of practices, but it was fractured and modified. One practice had records of me being treated for diabetes I didn't have. Another showed me receiving cancer treatment I'd never needed. A veterinary clinic somehow had records of me bringing in pets I'd never owned. But mixed in with the fake information were real details that no one should have had access to. Prescriptions I'd actually filled, medical procedures I'd actually undergone, even doctor's notes from appointments I'd actually attended. Someone was taking my real medical history, fragmenting it, modifying it, and distributing it across hundreds of fake patient records in medical practices nationwide. And I was the one with system access to all these databases, making me either the perfect witness or the perfect suspect. I started documenting everything I found, taking screenshots and saving files to my personal drive. But every time I tried to save evidence of my own information being misused, the files would corrupt or disappear. Screenshots would come out blank. Downloads would fail. The system seemed to be actively preventing me from gathering proof of what I was seeing. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night in June, when I received a ticket that made me question everything I thought I knew about my job. The ticket was from Dr. Sarah Kim's practice in Arizona. The same Sarah Kim whose patient records I'd seen in multiple other systems. But this time, Sarah Kim wasn't a patient. She was the doctor, and she was reporting a problem with someone remotely accessing her patient database without authorization. According to her ticket, someone had been logging into her practice management system, using legitimate IT credentials, accessing patient files, and making unauthorized changes to medical records. The intrusions always happened during overnight hours, between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. My work schedule. The ticket included IP logs showing the unauthorized access. Every single login traced back to my home internet connection. According to Dr. Kim's security logs, I had been accessing her patient database almost every night for the past 2 months, spending hours reviewing and modifying patient records. But I had no memory of ever working on her systems. I'd never received tickets from her practice before this one. I checked my own work logs and reports. There was no record of me ever connecting to Dr. Kim's network. But her security systems clearly showed my credentials being used to access her patient database repeatedly. Either someone was using my login information to access medical systems without my knowledge, or I was having extended periods of amnesia where I was working on cases I couldn't remember. I tried calling Dr. Kim's office directly, but the phone number in her ticket was disconnected. I tried looking up her practice online, but couldn't find any information about a Dr. Sarah Kim practicing in Arizona. No website, no business license, no professional registration. But the security logs were real. The patient database was real. The evidence of unauthorized access using my credentials was undeniable. I started staying awake during my shifts, forcing myself to remain conscious and aware of every action I took. I set up screen recording software to document every ticket I worked on, every system I accessed, every keystroke I made. But when I reviewed the recordings the next morning, they showed me doing things I had no memory of doing. There I was on screen, clearly visible, accessing medical databases I'd never seen before, reviewing patient records for hours at a time, making changes to medical histories and prescription information. The recordings showed me working steadily through the night, but I remembered only working on routine tickets that took a few minutes each. According to the screen recordings, I was spending most of my shift deep in patient databases, methodically reviewing and modifying medical records for the fake patients whose names I'd been tracking. But I had no conscious memory of any of that work. The most disturbing part was watching my own behavior in the recordings. I looked focused and purposeful, like someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I was clearly familiar with the systems, navigating complex medical databases with the efficiency of someone who'd been doing it for years. But it wasn't me. Or rather, it was my body, my hands on the keyboard, my voice when I occasionally spoke to myself while working. But it felt like watching a stranger who happened to look exactly like me. I tried setting alarms during my shifts, reminders to check what I was doing every hour. But the alarms never went off. I'd set them before starting work, and then the next thing I knew, it was 6 a.m. and time to clock out. According to my computer, I'd dismissed the alarms myself, but I had no memory of doing so. I installed keystroke logging software to track every action I took during my shifts. But when I tried to review the logs, the files were always corrupted or empty. Either the software was malfunctioning, or someone was actively preventing me from monitoring my own computer usage. The final straw came when I received a ticket from a practice I knew I'd never worked with before, Dr. Jessica Martinez, internal medicine in my own city. The ticket was simple. Please review and update patient database security protocols. Concerned about unauthorized access to sensitive medical records. Dr. Jessica Martinez. My own name, practicing medicine in my own city, reporting concerns about someone accessing patient databases without authorization. I tried calling the number listed for her practice. It went straight to a voicemail message in my own voice saying, "You've reached Dr. Martinez's office. I'm currently reviewing security protocols with our IT support team. Please leave a message, and I'll return your call once this matter is resolved." I hung up and sat staring at my computer screen, trying to process what I'd just heard. It was definitely my voice, but I'd never recorded that message. I'd never claimed to be Dr. Martinez. I had no medical training, and certainly wasn't practicing medicine. But according to the practice database I was supposed to be securing, Dr. Jessica Martinez had been treating patients for 3 years. She had medical licenses, malpractice insurance, a full patient roster, and years of treatment records. And every single one of her patients was someone whose records I'd seen in other medical databases. All the fake patients I'd been tracking were supposedly receiving treatment from a fake doctor who happened to have my name and voice. I spent that night searching through every medical database I had access to, looking for more instances of Dr. Jessica Martinez. What I found made me realize that I wasn't just witnessing medical fraud. I was somehow at the center of an elaborate identity theft operation that had been using my credentials, my access, and apparently my unconscious labor to create a vast network of fake medical practices and fraudulent patient records. But the most terrifying part was the growing realization that I might not be the victim of this operation. Based on the evidence, I appeared to be the one running it. All the unauthorized database access was traced to my IP address. All the fake medical records were created during my work hours. The fake practice, using my name, was communicating with patients in my voice. If law enforcement investigated this fraud, every piece of evidence would point directly to me. I tried to quit, but when I called Tech Care Solutions to resign, the phone number was disconnected. I tried emailing my resignation, but the emails bounced back. According to every system I could access, Tech Care Solutions didn't exist as a company. But I was still getting paychecks. Real money, deposited into my real bank account. For work I apparently couldn't stop doing even if I wanted to. That's when I realized the most disturbing possibility of all. What if I hadn't been hired by Tech Care Solutions? What if I'd created Tech Care Solutions myself, during those hours I couldn't remember, as a cover for the medical fraud operation I was running? What if the night shift IT support job was just an elaborate fiction I'd constructed to explain to myself why I was spending every night accessing medical databases and creating fake patient records? What if there never was a legitimate job at all? I'm writing this from a coffee shop at 3 a.m., having not logged into any work systems for the past week. But every night around 10 p.m., I feel an almost irresistible urge to go home, sit at my computer, and start reviewing medical databases. Like there's important work waiting for me, patients who need their records updated, systems that require my attention. Last night, I found myself standing in front of my computer at 2 a.m. with no memory of getting out of bed or walking to my desk. The login screen for a medical database was open, and my fingers were poised over the keyboard like I'd been about to start working. I think I'm going to see a doctor tomorrow. A real one, at a real practice, with a real medical license. But I'm terrified of what I might find when they pull up my medical records. The videos that watched me back. I used to think content moderation was just about removing spam and inappropriate posts. I thought I understood what I was getting into when I accepted the overnight position with Digital Safety Solutions. I was wrong about everything. The job posting seemed straightforward. Remote content moderator, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Reviewing user-submitted videos and images for policy violations. The pay was excellent, almost suspiciously good for what appeared to be routine work. They said the overnight shift was necessary because of global time zones, ensuring content could be reviewed and approved or removed within hours of submission. My training was conducted entirely online through video modules and written guidelines. The company maintained strict confidentiality policies, requiring signed agreements that prohibited discussing specific content or moderation decisions with anyone outside the organization. They explained this as protecting both user privacy and proprietary moderation techniques. The work interface was simple. Videos and images would appear on my screen with basic metadata: upload time, user location, reported content flags. I had 4 options: approve, remove, escalate to senior moderator, or flag for law enforcement. Most content fell into obvious categories that made decisions easy. For the first month, everything was exactly what I expected. Social media videos, user-generated content, live stream clips. I'd remove obvious policy violations, approve harmless content, occasionally escalate borderline cases. The work was monotonous but manageable, and I developed a rhythm that made the 8-hour shifts pass quickly. But sometime in February, I started noticing patterns in the content that made me uncomfortable. The first thing I noticed was how often I appeared in the background of videos I was reviewing. Not obviously, just glimpsed through windows, reflected in mirrors, or walking past in the distance. At first I thought it was coincidence or mistaken identity. Lots of people have similar builds and hair color, but the instances became too frequent to ignore. A live stream from a coffee shop showed someone who looked exactly like me sitting at a corner table, though I'd never been to that location. A vacation video from Florida included a brief shot of someone with my distinctive red jacket walking along a beach I'd never visited. The metadata showed these videos were uploaded from locations across the country, but they all contained glimpses of someone who looked remarkably like me doing things I had no memory of doing. I started paying closer attention to the content I was reviewing, looking for more instances of this doppelganger. What I found was disturbing in ways I'm still trying to process. In March, I reviewed a security camera footage from an apartment building in Oregon. The video showed someone breaking into a storage unit in the basement. The person was wearing dark clothing and a baseball cap, but when they turned toward the camera, I was looking at my own face. I watched the footage 3 times, studying every detail. The person in the video moved like me, had my posture, even the way they tilted their head when concentrating. But I'd never been to Oregon, never broken into anything, and certainly had no memory of the burglary I was watching myself commit on screen. According to the metadata, the video had been uploaded by the building's security company as evidence of criminal activity. I was being asked to moderate footage of what appeared to be my own felony. I flagged it for law enforcement review, as required by company policy, but the decision felt surreal. I was essentially reporting myself for crimes I had no memory of committing. Over the following weeks, more videos appeared showing this other version of myself engaged in increasingly serious criminal activity. Shoplifting from grocery stores, vandalizing property, breaking into cars, even what appeared to be drug transactions in parking lots. Each video was clear enough to identify facial features, but the crimes were always in locations I'd never visited, at times when I had solid alibis. I was either being framed by someone who looked exactly like me, or I was experiencing massive gaps in memory, during which I was traveling across the country committing crimes. The most disturbing videos started appearing in April, that I was reviewing what appeared to be amateur security footage from someone's home camera, when I saw myself entering a house through an unlocked back door. The timestamp showed 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. I checked my work logs. I'd been online and actively moderating content at that exact time. In the video, I moved through the house methodically like someone familiar with the layout. I went directly to specific rooms, opened particular drawers, collected items with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. But what made my hands shake wasn't watching myself burglarize someone's home. It was watching myself stop in front of a computer in the home office and plug in a USB drive. The person in the video, who looked exactly like me, spent several minutes at that computer, transferring files, installing something, making modifications I couldn't identify from the security footage. Then they unplugged the USB drive, pocketed it, and left the house as quietly as they'd entered. I realized I might be watching myself install surveillance software or steal personal information from victims' computers. The burglary was just cover for a more sophisticated operation involving identity theft or data mining. But I was reviewing this video during my work shift, sitting at my own computer, with no memory of ever being in that house or owning the USB drive I'd watched myself use. That I tried reaching out to my supervisor, but Digital Safety Solutions maintained minimal contact with content moderators. We communicated primarily through automated systems and standardized forms. When I submitted a request for clarification about the videos showing someone who resembled me, I received a form response stating that content moderators were not permitted to discuss specific videos or make inquiries about content origins. The response also reminded me that attempting to identify individuals in moderated content, including attempting to identify oneself, was grounds for immediate termination. But I couldn't stop looking for more videos of this other version of myself. What I found made me question everything I thought I knew about my job and my own identity. In May, I started finding videos that showed me at my own computer, working my content moderation shift. Someone was secretly filming me while I worked, creating surveillance footage of my overnight activities in my own apartment. The videos were taken from multiple angles, suggesting several hidden cameras positioned around my living space. I could see myself reviewing content, typing reports, taking breaks, even getting up to use the bathroom or make coffee. Every moment of my work shift was being recorded and submitted for content moderation review. I was being asked to moderate surveillance footage of myself doing the job I was currently performing. But the timestamps on these videos didn't match my memory of when they were recorded. Videos showing me working on Monday night were timestamped for Wednesday. Videos apparently recorded during my Tuesday shift showed me wearing clothes I distinctly remembered wearing on Friday. Either someone was manipulating the metadata on surveillance footage of me, or I was experiencing significant distortions in my perception of time and memory. The breakthrough came when I found a video that showed me discovering one of the hidden cameras. In the footage, I was working at my computer when I noticed something unusual about the smoke detector on my ceiling. I got up, examined it closely, and found a small camera hidden inside. The video showed me carefully removing the camera, studying it, and then looking directly into the lens with an expression I'd never seen on my own face before. It was my face, but the expression was cold, calculating, completely unfamiliar, like looking at a stranger who happened to share my physical features. Then the person who looked like me did something that made my blood freeze. They smiled directly into the camera and mouthed words I could read clearly. "I know you're watching." I had no memory of finding any cameras in my apartment. I had no memory of that cold, knowing expression or that message delivered to whoever was watching the surveillance footage. But when I checked my smoke detector after watching that video, I found exactly what the recording had shown. A tiny camera, sophisticated and expensive looking, positioned to record everything I did at my computer workstation. I searched my entire apartment and found 6 more cameras. They were hidden in places that required intimate knowledge of my daily routines to position effectively. Someone who knew exactly where I sat, where I walked, where I spent time had installed comprehensive surveillance equipment in my home. The cameras were connected to a wireless network I didn't recognize. When I tried to trace the network, it led back to an IP address registered to Digital Safety Solutions. My employer was secretly filming me while I worked, then submitting that surveillance footage for me to moderate as part of my regular duties. I was unknowingly reviewing and approving videos of my own daily activities. But that wasn't the worst part. When I examined the cameras more closely, I found they weren't just recording. They were also capable of live streaming, and according to their internal logs, they'd been broadcasting continuously for months. Someone had been watching me in real time, every night while I worked. But the streaming destination wasn't just Digital Safety Solutions. The cameras were broadcasting to multiple IP addresses, some of which appeared to be residential locations. I was being live streamed to unknown viewers as entertainment or surveillance, and my job was to moderate and approve the recordings of this violation of my privacy. I tried to remove all the cameras, but every time I found and disabled one, a new video would appear in my moderation queue showing me discovering and removing surveillance equipment. The videos were always time-stamped several hours before I actually found the cameras, as if someone was predicting my actions or manipulating my sense of time. The final revelation came when I found a video that showed me installing the cameras myself. The footage was clear and detailed. There I was methodically positioning surveillance equipment throughout my apartment, testing angles, adjusting settings, connecting everything to the wireless network. I worked with the familiarity of someone who'd done this many times before. But what disturbed me most wasn't watching myself install surveillance equipment in my own home. It was the timestamp on the video. According to the metadata, I'd installed the cameras 3 months before I'd started working for Digital Safety Solutions. I'd set up comprehensive surveillance of my own apartment, then applied for a job that would require me to moderate footage from those same cameras. I'd created my own surveillance network, then gotten a job reviewing my own surveillance footage, apparently without any conscious memory of doing either thing. I spent the rest of that week searching through every video I'd moderated since starting the job, looking for more evidence of this other version of myself. What I found was a complete parallel life I had no memory of living. Videos showed me traveling to cities I'd never visited, meeting with people I'd never seen before, conducting what appeared to be business meetings in offices I'd never entered. In every video, I looked comfortable and familiar with the locations and people, like someone maintaining ongoing relationships and conducting regular activities. But none of these activities corresponded to my conscious memories. According to my bank records, I hadn't traveled anywhere in over a year. According to my calendar, I worked my content moderation shift and spent my free time at home or running routine errands. Yet the video evidence showed me living an entirely different life during times when I thought I was sleeping or relaxing at home. I started setting multiple alarms during my sleep hours, trying to catch myself if I was leaving the apartment without conscious awareness. But the alarms never woke me up. According to my phone, I was dismissing them myself, but I had no memory of doing so. I installed motion sensors and door alarms to detect if anyone entered or left my apartment. But the logs showed regular activity during hours when I was supposedly asleep, and the person triggering the sensors was always me. According to the electronic evidence, I was leaving my apartment almost every night, staying out for hours at a time, then returning and going to bed with no memory of where I'd been or what I'd done. The videos I was moderating during my work shifts were documentation of a life I was apparently living but couldn't remember. Last week, I found a video that made everything clear and infinitely more terrifying. It showed me sitting at my computer, working my content moderation shift, but the camera angle was from directly behind my monitor. I could see my face clearly as I reviewed videos, and I could see my reactions to specific content. But what I saw wasn't the person I remembered being. In the video, I smiled while watching footage of the burglaries and crimes. I laughed at videos that should have been disturbing. When I found surveillance footage of myself, I didn't look confused or concerned. I looked satisfied, like someone reviewing their own work with approval. Either the video was somehow altered to change my expressions, or my memory of my own emotional reactions was completely false. But the most chilling moment came at the end of the video, when the person who looked like me turned directly toward the camera and spoke clearly. "I know you'll find this eventually. I know you'll watch yourself watching me. The question is, which one of us is real?" Then they smiled with an expression I'd never worn in my life, and went back to moderating content. I've been sitting in this coffee shop for 6 hours now, afraid to go home, afraid to log into work, afraid to check if there are new videos waiting for me to moderate. Because I'm starting to realize that the content moderation job might not be what I think it is. What if I'm not reviewing random user-submitted videos? What if I'm reviewing surveillance footage of my own dissociative episodes, crimes I'm committing during memory gaps, evidence of a parallel life I'm living without conscious awareness? What if the job is just an elaborate way to make me complicit in monitoring and approving my own criminal activity? My shift starts in 2 hours, and I can feel that familiar urge to go home, log into the system, and start reviewing videos. But I'm terrified of what I might find tonight. More footage of crimes I don't remember committing? More evidence of a life I'm not conscious of living? Or worse, videos of this other version of myself doing things that the conscious part of my mind could never accept or justify? I think I'm going to drive to the nearest police station instead of going home. I need to report what I've discovered, show them the evidence I've gathered, and ask them to investigate digital safety solutions. But I'm scared of what they'll find when they trace those IP addresses and examine those videos. Because what if I'm not the victim in this situation? What if I'm the perpetrator, and the content moderation job is just an elaborate psychological mechanism to help me rationalize and process my own criminal behavior? What if there is no digital safety solutions, and I've been creating an elaborate fiction to explain why I spend 8 hours every night watching surveillance footage of my own dissociative crimes? I'm looking at my reflection in the coffee shop window now, and for just a moment, I swear I saw that cold, knowing expression I recognized from the videos. The expression of someone who knows exactly what they've been doing, even if part of their mind insists on pretending otherwise. I've been an accountant for 12 years, but I've never encountered anything like what happened during my remote audit work for Pinnacle Financial Services. I'm writing this because I need someone else to know what I found, even if it sounds impossible. The job came at a perfect time. My previous firm had downsized, and I needed work that could pay my mortgage while I searched for a permanent position. Pinnacle offered excellent compensation for overnight financial auditing, reviewing small business accounts, and preparing compliance reports. The work was entirely remote, which suited my situation perfectly. They specialized in serving rural businesses, family-owned operations, and small-town enterprises that needed professional accounting services, but couldn't afford full-time staff. My job was to review their financial records after business hours, identify discrepancies, prepare audit reports, and ensure their books were clean for tax purposes. The setup was straightforward. Each night I'd receive a list of businesses to audit, login credentials for their accounting software, and deadlines for completing my reviews. Most were simple operations: restaurants, retail shops, auto repair services, small manufacturing companies. The kind of businesses that form the backbone of small-town America. I'd been doing the work for about 6 weeks when I started noticing unusual patterns in the financial data I was reviewing. The first thing that caught my attention was how similar many of these businesses were in their financial structures. Small restaurants in different states had nearly identical revenue patterns, expense categories, and profit margins. Auto repair shops hundreds of miles apart showed the same seasonal fluctuations, the same vendor relationships, even the same employee payroll structures. At first, I attributed this to industry standards and similar business models. Successful small businesses often follow proven patterns, and it made sense that companies in the same industry would have comparable financial profiles. But as I continued working, the similarities became too precise to be coincidental. I was auditing a hardware store in Montana when I realized I'd seen these exact same numbers before. Not similar numbers, but identical figures down to the penny. Revenue, expenses, inventory costs, payroll, everything matched perfectly with a hardware store I'd audited in Ohio 3 weeks earlier. I pulled up both sets of books and compared them side by side. The businesses had different names, different addresses, supposedly different owners, but their financial records were absolutely identical. Every transaction, every date, every amount was exactly the same. Either someone had copied the financial records from one business to another, or both businesses were elaborate fictions using the same template. I started keeping detailed notes about the businesses I was auditing, tracking similarities and cross-referencing financial data. What I discovered was that roughly 30% of the companies I was reviewing showed suspicious similarities. Not just comparable, but identical in ways that suggested they weren't real businesses at all. The fake businesses were sophisticated in their construction. They had proper business licenses, tax identification numbers, bank accounts, vendor relationships, and employee records. But their financial activity followed patterns that were too perfect, too clean, too predictable to represent actual business operations. Real small businesses have irregular cash flows, unexpected expenses, seasonal variations, and the kind of financial messiness that comes from actual human activity. These businesses showed textbook perfect financial management that no real-world operation could sustain. I tried discussing my concerns with my supervisor at Pinnacle, but the company maintained very limited contact with their remote auditors. We communicated primarily through email and standardized reports. When I raised questions about potentially fraudulent financial records, I received form responses directing me to focus on completing assigned audits within specified deadlines. But I couldn't ignore what I was seeing. By August, I'd identified over 200 businesses that appeared to be financial fictions. They existed on paper, had proper documentation, and maintained active bank accounts, but their financial activity suggested they were shells designed to move money rather than actual operating businesses. The money flows were what really convinced me something was wrong. These fake businesses weren't just maintaining static financial records. Money was actively flowing through their accounts in complex patterns that served no obvious business purpose. Funds would come in from various sources, get transferred between accounts, have fictional expenses deducted, then get moved to other businesses or investment accounts. It looked like an elaborate money laundering operation, disguised as routine small business financial management. But the most disturbing discovery was realizing how my own work fit into this system. My audit reports weren't just compliance documents. They were being used to legitimize the financial activity of these shell companies. My professional signature and certification were providing credible validation for what appeared to be large-scale financial fraud. Every report I completed was essentially a professional endorsement that these businesses were operating legitimately and maintaining proper financial records. If law enforcement ever investigated these operations, my audit reports would be evidence that certified professionals had reviewed and approved their financial practices, that I was unknowingly providing professional cover for criminal activity. I decided to dig deeper into the structure of Pinnacle Financial Services itself. What I found made me realize I was in much deeper trouble than I'd imagined. Pinnacle Financial Services had no physical offices, no business licenses in any state I could find, no professional certifications or accreditations from accounting organizations. The company appeared to exist only as a website and a payment processing system. But I was getting paid, real money, deposited into my real bank account for work I was actually performing. Someone was funding this operation with enough capital to pay competitive salaries to professional auditors. I tried researching the individual businesses I'd been auditing, looking for more information about their operations. What I discovered was that most of them had no online presence beyond basic business registration documents. No websites, no social media, no advertising, no customer reviews, no local business directory listings. These companies existed in the official record-keeping systems, but had no actual presence in their communities. I started calling some of the businesses directly, using phone numbers from their financial records. Most of the numbers were disconnected or went to generic voicemail systems. The few that were answered were obviously call forwarding services with people who knew nothing about the businesses they were supposedly representing. But when I called a restaurant in Iowa that I'd audited the week before, something happened that made my hands shake. The person who answered the phone knew my name. "Hi, Jessica," they said before I'd introduced myself. "We've been expecting your call. Thank you for completing our audit so promptly. Your report was exactly what we needed." I hadn't told them my name or why I was calling, but they knew I'd completed their audit and were thanking me for work I'd done entirely remotely for a business I'd never contacted before. "How did you know who I was?" I asked. "We work very closely with Pinnacle Financial Services," they replied. "We know all of our auditors personally. You've been doing excellent work for us. I've never spoken to anyone from your restaurant before." "Of course you have, Jessica. We have regular check-ins about our financial requirements. Don't you remember our conversation last Tuesday?" I had no memory of any conversation with anyone from that restaurant. I'd never spoken to them before this call, but they were describing interactions and discussions that supposedly had never happened. "I think there's been a mistake," I said. "No mistake, Jessica. You've been our primary auditor for 8 months now. We've worked together on dozens of compliance issues. Are you feeling all right? You sound confused." 8 months. But I'd only been working for Pinnacle Financial Services for 6 weeks, and I'd never had direct contact with any of the businesses I was auditing. Either this person was confusing me with someone else, or I was experiencing significant memory gaps regarding my own work activities. I hung up and immediately checked my work records and email history. According to my files, I'd only been working with Pinnacle for 6 weeks and had never communicated directly with any of the businesses I was auditing. But when I checked my phone records, I found dozens of calls to and from the restaurant dating back 8 months. The calls were long, some lasting over an hour, suggesting detailed business discussions. I had no memory of making or receiving any of these calls. I started checking my records more carefully, cross-referencing my work files with my phone logs, bank records, and email history. What I found was evidence of extensive work activity that I had no conscious memory of performing. According to my phone logs, I was having regular conversations with businesses I was supposedly auditing for the first time. According to my internet history, I'd been accessing financial software and business databases for months before I thought I'd started working for Pinnacle. Most disturbing, according to my bank records, I'd been receiving payments from Pinnacle Financial Services for nearly a year, but I only remembered starting the job 6 weeks ago. Either I was experiencing massive memory loss regarding my own work activities, or someone was manipulating my records to create false evidence of work I'd never performed. I decided to set up monitoring software on my computer and phone to track my activities during hours when I thought I was sleeping or relaxing. If I was having dissociative episodes during which I was performing work I couldn't remember, the monitoring would capture evidence. What the monitoring software revealed was far more disturbing than memory gaps. The recordings showed me working during hours when I was supposedly asleep, but the work I was doing was completely different from the audit assignments I consciously remembered. Instead of reviewing small business financial records, I was creating them. The recordings showed me spending hours building elaborate financial histories for fictional businesses, creating years of fake transaction data, establishing complex money flow patterns between shell companies, and preparing fraudulent documentation to support non-existent operations. I was watching myself construct the very financial frauds that I thought I was discovering during my conscious audit work. But the person in the recordings didn't look confused or coerced. They worked with the confidence and efficiency of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had been doing it for a long time. The recordings also showed me having phone conversations with various people, apparently coordinating the creation and maintenance of the shell company network. I spoke about money laundering operations, tax avoidance strategies, and methods for moving large amounts of money through seemingly legitimate business channels. In these recorded conversations, I demonstrated detailed knowledge of financial crimes, regulatory loopholes, and international banking practices that I had no conscious memory of learning. I was apparently living a double life, consciously believing I was a legitimate financial auditor while unconsciously operating as a professional money launderer. But the most chilling discovery came when I found recordings of myself creating my own employment records with Pinnacle Financial Services. The recordings showed me setting up the entire job, creating the company website, establishing the payment systems, preparing the audit assignments I would later believe I was receiving from an external employer. I had created my own employment as an elaborate psychological cover for criminal activity I was conducting during dissociative states. Pinnacle Financial Services wasn't employing me. I was Pinnacle Financial Services, and I'd hired myself to provide professional legitimacy for my own criminal operations. The audit work I thought I was performing for an external company was actually quality control on my own financial fraud network. I was reviewing and certifying the fake businesses I'd created during memory gaps, ensuring they would pass scrutiny if investigated. I spent the next week reviewing all the evidence I'd gathered, trying to understand the scope of what I'd apparently been doing without conscious awareness. The monitoring software showed that I'd been operating this double life for over 2 years, systematically building a network of shell companies while consciously believing I was working legitimate accounting jobs. The financial records suggested I'd moved over $15 million through the shell company network, taking substantial fees for money laundering services while maintaining complete conscious ignorance of the criminal enterprise. But what terrified me most was discovering that I'd been planning to expand the operation. The recordings showed me researching additional auditors and accountants who could be recruited to provide professional cover for expanded criminal activities. I'd been preparing to offer other financial professionals the same kind of remote audit work I thought I'd been hired to perform. I finally understood the true purpose of my work. I wasn't just laundering money. I was building a system to implicate other professionals in financial crimes, spreading criminal liability across multiple people who would have no conscious knowledge of their participation in illegal activities. Last night, I decided to confront this other version of myself directly. I set up cameras to record my overnight activities, then waited to see what I would do during the hours I normally couldn't remember. What I recorded was a 40-minute conversation between two versions of myself. The conscious version of me, asking questions and demanding explanations. The unconscious version, providing detailed answers about the criminal operation, the money laundering network, and the psychological techniques used to maintain the dissociative state. According to the unconscious version, the memory gaps were deliberately induced through a combination of prescription medications and conditioning techniques. The goal was to allow me to operate a sophisticated criminal enterprise while maintaining plausible deniability through genuine ignorance of my own activities. If I was ever investigated, I could honestly claim to have no knowledge of criminal activity because my conscious mind truly had no access to those memories. But the most disturbing revelation was learning that this wasn't happening to me accidentally. The unconscious version explained that I'd voluntarily undergone the conditioning that created the dissociative state. I'd made a conscious decision to fragment my own memory in order to operate criminal enterprises while maintaining psychological comfort. I'd chosen to become unknowingly complicit in my own crimes. The conscious version of me in the recording asked why I would make such a choice. The unconscious version smiled and said, "Because you knew you'd never have the courage to do what needed to be done if you remembered doing it." I'm writing this from a hotel room 300 miles from my apartment. I've been here for 5 days, afraid to go home, afraid to check my bank account, afraid to log into any of the systems I now know I created. But every night around 11 p.m., I feel an almost irresistible urge to return home and begin working on the audit assignments I know are waiting for me. The psychological conditioning is still active, still pulling me back to continue the criminal activities I've been unconsciously performing. I've made an appointment with the FBI Financial Crimes Unit for tomorrow morning. I'm going to turn over all the evidence I've gathered and confess to crimes I can't remember committing. But I'm terrified that when I sit down with federal agents and try to explain what I've discovered, I'll find that the conscious version of myself is just another layer of self-deception. What if the unconscious criminal and the confused victim are both fictional personas I've created to avoid acknowledging what I really am? What if there is no dissociation, no memory gaps, no psychological conditioning? What if I'm simply a criminal who's constructed an elaborate fantasy about being an unknowing victim of my own crimes? What if I remember everything perfectly, and the confusion is just another form of denial? In 6 hours, I'll either be confessing to federal agents or discovering that even this confession is just another layer in an increasingly complex web of self-deception. I'm looking at myself in the hotel mirror, trying to detect any sign of that knowing, criminal expression I saw in the recordings. But all I see is someone who looks exactly like me, claiming to be confused about their own identity. And I'm no longer sure which one of us is telling the truth. I never thought medical transcription would be anything more than typing what doctors dictate into patient files. I was wrong about that, and I was wrong about a lot of other things too. I'm writing this because I need to get it all down before I lose the ability to distinguish between what's real and what I've been hearing in these recordings. The job with MedScript Solutions seemed perfect when I started 3 months ago. Remote medical transcription, overnight shift, decent pay for converting doctor audio recordings into typed medical reports. The work was straightforward. Listen to physicians dictating patient encounters, diagnostic notes, treatment plans, and surgery reports, then transcribed everything into standardized medical documents. Most healthcare providers record their patient notes throughout the day, then send the audio files to transcription services overnight. My job was to process these recordings while doctors slept, ensuring their patient files were updated and ready for the next day's appointments. The training was entirely online, focusing on medical terminology, proper formatting, and confidentiality requirements. Healthcare transcription involves accessing sensitive patient information, so I signed extensive privacy agreements and underwent background checks before gaining access to the medical audio files. For the first month, the work was exactly what I expected. Routine patient visits, prescription notes, diagnostic observations, surgical reports. I'd listened to doctors dictating in the familiar rhythm of medical professionals. Clinical, precise, focused on symptoms and treatments rather than patients as people. I developed a rhythm that made the 8-hour shifts manageable. Most doctors dictated clearly, medical terminology became familiar, and I could type fast enough to keep pace with the audio without falling behind on my assigned caseload. But sometime in October, I started hearing things in the recordings that made me uncomfortable. The first incident happened during a routine transcription of emergency room notes. Dr. Patricia Chun from St. Mary's Hospital was dictating a report about treating a car accident victim when she mentioned something that made me pause the recording. Patient Jessica Martinez presented with multiple lacerations and possible concussion following motor vehicle accident. Patient appeared confused and disoriented, repeatedly asking about transcription work and overnight shifts. My name is Jessica Martinez. I'd never been in a car accident, never been treated at St. Mary's Hospital, and certainly never been a patient of Dr. Chin. But she was dictating notes about treating someone with my exact name, who was apparently concerned about transcription work. I replayed the recording several times, thinking I'd misheard something. But the audio was clear. Dr. Chin was definitely discussing a patient named Jessica Martinez who matched my personal details, and was apparently talking about work similar to what I was currently doing. I figured it was just a coincidence. Jessica Martinez is a common name, and lots of people work night shifts in various industries. But the specific mention of transcription work felt unsettling. Over the following weeks, I started paying closer attention to patient names and details in the medical recordings I was transcribing. What I discovered was disturbing in ways I'm still trying to process. My name appeared regularly in medical records from hospitals across the country. Sometimes as Jessica Martinez, sometimes as Jessica Torres, sometimes with variations of my middle name or slightly different spellings. But the birth dates were always close to mine, and the personal details were often eerily accurate. A Jessica Martinez in Texas had been treated for chronic insomnia and eye strain related to computer work during overnight hours. I'd been experiencing both problems since starting the transcription job, but I'd never sought medical treatment. A Jessica Torres in Florida had visited an emergency room complaining of hearing voices during night shift work, specifically voices that seemed to know personal information about her. The doctor's notes described her as anxious, and possibly experiencing auditory hallucinations related to work stress. The most disturbing recording came from Dr. Robert Harrison at Phoenix General Hospital. He was dictating notes about a psychiatric consultation with a patient who claimed to be a medical transcriptionist. Hearing her own name in the recordings, she was supposed to be typing. Patient Jessica Martinez, 28 years old, presents with occupational paranoia and possible dissociative symptoms related to overnight transcription work. Patient reports hearing medical professionals discuss her personal information in audio recordings she processes for employment. Recommends psychological evaluation and possible medication for work-related anxiety disorder. I listened to that recording 5 times, checking the metadata to confirm it was a legitimate medical file. According to the system, Dr. Harrison had dictated those notes 2 weeks earlier about a patient with my name, my age, and my exact work situation. But I'd never been to Phoenix General Hospital. I'd never had a psychiatric consultation. I'd never discussed my work concerns with any medical professional. Either someone with my name and identical circumstances had sought treatment for the exact same problems I was experiencing, or I was somehow appearing in medical records for treatments I couldn't remember receiving. I started documenting every instance of my name or similar personal details appearing in the medical transcriptions. Over the next month, I found references to Jessica Martinez or similar names in over 50 different medical records from hospitals across 20 states. The medical conditions and complaints were consistently related to overnight work, computerized strain, social isolation, sleep disorders, and increasing anxiety about hearing personal information in work-related audio recordings. It was as if multiple versions of myself were seeking medical treatment for problems I was experiencing, but never reporting to doctors. The breakthrough came when I received an audio file that changed everything I thought I understood about my job and my own identity. The recording was from Dr. Sarah Kim at Mercy Hospital in Oregon. She was dictating notes from a patient consultation, but something about her voice made me pay closer attention than usual. She sounded familiar, though I couldn't place where I might have heard her before. Patient presents with severe occupational stress related to medical transcription work. Reports hearing voices in audio recordings that seem to respond to her presence as a listener. Patient believes the doctors in the recordings are aware they're being transcribed and are intentionally including personal information about the transcriptionist. As Dr. Kim continued dictating, I realized why her voice sounded familiar. I'd heard it in dozens of other recordings over the past 3 months. Not just as Dr. Sarah Kim from Mercy Hospital, but as Dr. Patricia Chun from St. Mary's, Dr. Robert Harrison from Phoenix General, and at least a dozen other physicians from different hospitals. The same voice was dictating medical notes under different names from different locations, but always discussing patients with problems identical to what I was experiencing as a medical transcriptionist. I started comparing audio files more systematically, analyzing voice patterns and speech characteristics across different recordings. What I discovered was that roughly 60% of the medical dictations I'd been transcribing were created by the same 5 voices, just using different names and claiming to work at different hospitals. The same people were generating hundreds of fake medical records under multiple physician identities, and I was transcribing all of it into official medical documents. But the content of these fake medical records wasn't random. Every single fabricated patient file was about someone experiencing psychological problems related to overnight transcription work. They were comprehensive case studies of transcriptionists developing paranoia, auditory hallucinations, and dissociative symptoms from processing medical audio files. I was being employed to create detailed documentation of my own psychological deterioration. The fake medical records described a progression of symptoms that matched exactly what I'd been experiencing. Initial comfort with routine work, gradual recognition of personal information in recordings, increasing anxiety about being monitored, and eventual development of paranoid beliefs about the transcription process itself. Someone had mapped out my psychological response to the job before I'd even started working, then created fake medical documentation to track my progress through predictable stages of occupational paranoia. I tried contacting my supervisor at MedScript Solutions to report the fraudulent medical records, but the company's contact information led to disconnected phone numbers and bounced emails. When I tried researching the company online, I found no business registration, no professional licenses, no physical address. Medscript Solutions appeared to exist only as a payment processing system that deposited money into my bank account for transcription work I was performing on fake medical records. But the work was real, the audio files were professionally produced, and I was being paid actual money for creating detailed documentation of fictional medical cases that all seemed designed to describe my own psychological state. I decided to dig deeper into the source of the audio recordings I was transcribing. The metadata on each file included hospital names, physician identities, and patient reference numbers that should correspond to real medical facilities and actual healthcare providers. When I started verifying this information, I discovered that most of the hospitals mentioned in the recordings didn't exist. The physician names weren't licensed in the states where they claimed to practice. The patient reference numbers followed no standard medical record-keeping system. But some of the hospitals were real, which made everything more confusing and frightening. I called St. Mary's Hospital directly and asked to speak with Dr. Patricia Chun, whose voice I'd been hearing regularly in transcription files. The hospital operator told me no one by that name worked there, but they transferred me to someone who could help with medical record inquiries. The person who answered identified herself as Dr. Patricia Chun. It was the same voice I'd been hearing in recordings for months, but when I explained that I was a medical transcriptionist working on her audio files, she seemed confused. "I don't dictate patient notes," she said. "Our hospital uses electronic medical records with direct input. We haven't used transcription services in over 5 years. But I have dozens of audio recordings of you dictating patient encounters and medical procedures." "That's not possible. I've never recorded any medical dictations. Are you sure you have the right person?" I played a sample of one of her recorded dictations over the phone. There was a long silence before she responded. "That's definitely my voice," she said quietly. "But I have no memory of recording that. When was this supposedly dictated?" I gave her the date and timestamp from the metadata. I was on vacation that week. I wasn't even in the state. But that's absolutely my voice discussing medical procedures I actually performed the month before. We spent the next 20 minutes comparing the recorded dictations to her actual patient files. The recordings contained accurate medical information about real patients she'd treated, but organized and presented in ways that suggested the audio had been created from her written notes rather than live dictation. Someone had been converting Dr. Chen's written medical records into audio recordings using synthesized speech technology that replicated her voice perfectly. But that technology couldn't explain how the recordings included details about my personal life and work situation. The fake dictations weren't just reproducing existing medical records. They were creating entirely fictional cases designed specifically for me to transcribe. Dr. Chin suggested I contact hospital security and potentially law enforcement, as someone was apparently using her professional identity to create fraudulent medical records. But I was reluctant to involve authorities because I wasn't sure how to explain my role in transcribing potentially criminal evidence. Instead, I decided to set up recording equipment to monitor my own activities during work hours. If I was experiencing dissociative episodes or memory gaps related to the transcription work, the recordings might reveal what was actually happening during my overnight shifts. What the monitoring equipment captured was far more disturbing than missing time or psychological symptoms. The recordings showed me having conversations with the audio files I was supposedly transcribing. In the surveillance footage, I would play a medical dictation through my headphones, then respond aloud to what I was hearing, as if the doctors in the recordings could hear me and were responding to my comments. "Yes, Dr. Chun, I've been experiencing those exact symptoms," I heard myself say in response to a dictation about occupational anxiety. "You're right, Dr. Harrison. I've been hearing my name more frequently in the recordings. I understand what you're suggesting, Dr. Kim. Maybe I should consider seeking treatment." But when I reviewed the actual audio files the next day, they contained no responses to my comments. The doctors weren't acknowledging my presence or responding to anything I said. The recordings were standard medical dictations with no interactive elements. Yet the surveillance footage clearly showed me having detailed conversations with voices that apparently only I could hear. The monitoring equipment also revealed that I wasn't just transcribing the medical recordings. I was editing them. The footage showed me using audio editing software to modify the recordings, adding segments, changing details, inserting references to my personal information and work situation. I was systematically altering the medical dictations to include content about myself, then transcribing the modified versions as if they were the original files. I was creating the very evidence of occupational paranoia that was causing me to question my own mental health. But the person in the surveillance recordings didn't look confused or distressed while doing this work. They moved with the confidence and efficiency of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had been doing it for a long time. I was watching myself systematically manufacture evidence of my own psychological deterioration, but the person doing the work looked completely rational and purposeful. The final revelation came when I found recordings of myself creating the entire transcription job that I thought I'd been hired to perform. The surveillance footage showed me setting up MedScript solutions, creating the fake medical recordings, establishing the payment systems, and designing the psychological manipulation that would make me believe I was experiencing occupational paranoia. I had created my own employment as an elaborate method of psychological self-torture. But why would I design such an elaborate system to convince myself I was losing my mind? The answer came in the form of a video message I'd apparently recorded for myself to find after the psychological conditioning was complete. In the message, I explained that I'd been involved in actual medical record fraud at my previous job, helping to create false patient files and fraudulent insurance claims. When the investigation got too close, I'd needed a way to establish legal insanity as a defense for the crimes I'd committed. The transcription job was designed to create documented evidence of severe occupational psychosis that would support an insanity plea if I was arrested for the medical fraud. By the time authorities traced the financial crimes back to me, I would have months of recorded evidence showing my deteriorating mental health, including detailed medical documentation of my psychological symptoms created through the fake transcription work. I had planned my own psychological breakdown as a legal strategy. The video message explained that the surveillance recordings, the modified audio files, and even this written account of my experiences were all designed to create a comprehensive record of someone losing touch with reality due to work-related stress. If questioned by investigators, I would genuinely believe I'd been employed as a legitimate medical transcriptionist who gradually developed paranoid delusions about hearing personal information in work recordings. The psychological conditioning was sophisticated enough that my belief in this false history would be completely sincere. I would pass any lie detector test or psychiatric evaluation because I truly believed the cover story I'd created for myself. But now I'd discovered the truth behind the psychological manipulation, which meant the legal strategy was compromised. I knew I'd committed medical record fraud, knew I'd created the transcription job to establish insanity, knew the whole paranoia narrative was fabricated. Or did I? The video message ended with a chilling question. How do you know this message is real? How do you know you're not still experiencing the psychological conditioning? How do you know that discovering the truth isn't just another layer of the manufactured paranoia? I've been sitting in this coffee shop for 8 hours, trying to figure out which parts of my experience are real and which parts are psychological manipulation I designed for myself. Did I really commit medical record fraud and design an elaborate insanity defense? Or is that explanation itself part of the occupational paranoia I'm experiencing as a legitimate medical transcriptionist? Are the surveillance recordings real evidence of my psychological conditioning? Or are they fabricated memories implanted to make me believe I'm in control of my own mental deterioration? Is this written account a genuine confession, or is it another manufactured piece of evidence in a legal defense strategy one may or may not have actually planned? I don't know what's real anymore, but I think that might be exactly the point. My shift starts in 3 hours, and I can feel the familiar urge to go home, put on my headphones, and begin transcribing the medical recordings that may or may not contain doctors who are aware I'm listening. Whether I'm a criminal mastermind who designed an elaborate psychological manipulation, or a legitimate transcriptionist developing work-related paranoia, or something else entirely, the result is the same. I no longer know who I am or why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I suspect that's exactly what I intended. Keep telling myself I'm going to stop checking social media, but every time I try to log off, I find something else that makes my skin crawl. I'm writing this down because I need to document what's been happening during my remote content monitoring job, even though I'm not sure anyone will believe it. 3 months ago, I started working as a social media content monitor for a company called Digital Community Solutions. The job was simple: review flagged posts, comments, and user reports across multiple social platforms during overnight hours when automated systems couldn't handle complex moderation decisions. The pay was excellent for remote work, and the flexible schedule meant I could work from home during hours when most people were asleep. The training was conducted entirely online through video modules covering community guidelines, harassment policies, and content escalation procedures. DCS specialized in providing moderation services for smaller social media platforms, dating apps, and online communities that couldn't afford full-time moderation staff. My job was to review content that had been flagged by users or automated systems, determine whether it violated platform guidelines, and either approve it, remove it, or escalate it to senior moderators. Most of the work was routine: spam detection, harassment reports, inappropriate imagery, and community guideline violations. For the first 6 weeks, everything was exactly what I expected. I'd log into the DCS dashboard, work through queues of flagged content, make moderation decisions, and file reports about policy violations. The content was typical social media stuff: arguments between users, questionable photos, promotional spam, and the usual spectrum of human behavior when people think they're anonymous online. But sometime in September, I started noticing patterns in the flagged content that made me uncomfortable. The first thing that caught my attention was how often I appeared in posts I was supposed to be moderating. Not obviously, just glimpsed in background photos, mentioned in comments, or tagged in posts by people I didn't recognize. At first I thought it was coincidence or cases of mistaken identity, but the instances became too frequent and too specific to ignore. I was reviewing a harassment complaint about a user named Mike_Torres_47 when I noticed that one of his recent posts included a photo taken outside my apartment building. The post wasn't about me, just a casual photo with caption about urban architecture, but I could clearly see my building's distinctive front entrance and the coffee shop on the ground floor. The metadata showed the photo had been taken 3 days earlier at 2:30 a.m., which was during my work shift. I'd been home, at my computer, moderating content when someone was apparently taking photos of my building and posting them on social media. I started paying closer attention to background details in the posts I was reviewing. Over the following week, I found my apartment building, my car, my grocery store, and even the inside of the coffee shop where I bought lunch appearing in posts from users across different platforms. Someone was systematically documenting my daily routine and incorporating those locations into social media posts that I was then assigned to moderate as part of my job. But what made it infinitely more disturbing was realizing that some of the posts contained information about my work schedule, my personal habits, and details about my life that no casual observer could have known. A user named Sarah_K_98 posted about seeing the night shift girl at the grocery store, mentioning that I always shopped around 4 p.m. and seemed tired from working overnight. I did shop around 4 p.m. because that's when I woke up, and I was often tired from my overnight work schedule. Another user, David_Chin_2024, posted about the content moderator who lives in 3B, discussing how I kept irregular hours and always had my computer on late at night. I do live in apartment 3B, and my computer is always on during my work shifts. These weren't random observations. People were specifically tracking and posting about my daily activities, then submitting their own posts for moderation, so I'd be forced to review surveillance content about myself. I tried reporting this to my supervisor at DCS, but the company maintained minimal contact with content moderators. We communicated primarily through automated ticket systems and standardized forms. When I submitted a report about potentially harassing content directed at me personally, I received a form response directing me to focus on platform guideline violations rather than personal concerns. But I couldn't ignore what I was seeing. By October, I'd identified over 100 social media posts that contained references to my location, schedule, appearance, or activities. They were spread across different platforms and created by different user accounts, but they all showed detailed knowledge of my personal life. The posts weren't threatening or obviously harmful. They were mundane observations about someone they called the Monitor, the Night Shift Girl, or Apartment 3B. But collectively, they represented comprehensive surveillance of my daily activities. Someone was coordinating a network of social media accounts to document and share information about my life, then ensuring I would see all of it by flagging the posts for content review. The breakthrough came when I started analyzing the user accounts that were creating posts about me. Mike_Torres_47 had been active on social media for 2 years, with hundreds of posts about normal social media topics: food photos, political opinions, work complaints, family updates. But mixed in with this normal content were regular posts containing subtle references to my activities. Sarah_K_98 had a similar profile. Thousands of posts over 3 years, presenting as a normal social media user with friends, interests, and typical online behavior. But roughly once a week, she would post something that referenced my location or routine. David_Chen_2024, Jessica_Martinez_89, and dozens of other accounts showed the same pattern. They appeared to be legitimate social media users with authentic online personalities, but they were all periodically posting surveillance updates about my life. Either I was being stalked by a large group of people who were coordinating their social media activity, or someone was operating multiple fake accounts designed to make me think I was under comprehensive surveillance. But the posts contained information that suggested real-world observation, not just online monitoring. Sarah_K_98 posted about seeing me looking tired and stressed at the grocery store, accurately describing the clothes I'd been wearing and the items I'd purchased. David_Chin_2024 mentioned hearing my television playing late at night through thin apartment walls, correctly identifying specific shows I'd been watching during work breaks. These accounts had access to real-time information about my physical activities and personal habits that couldn't be obtained through online surveillance alone. I decided to test whether the social media accounts were actually monitoring me in real time. I started deliberately changing my routine, shopping at different times, taking different routes, altering my normal patterns to see if the social media posts would reflect these changes. Within days, the posts adapted to my new schedule. When I started shopping at 6 p.m. instead of 4 p.m., Sarah_K_98 posted about the Night Shift Girl changing her routine. When I started taking a different route home from the grocery store, Mike_Torres_47 posted photos from that exact route with captions about new walking paths in the neighborhood. The social media surveillance was responding to my behavioral changes in real time, which meant whoever was operating these accounts had ongoing access to information about my daily activities. But the most disturbing discovery was finding posts that seemed to predict my actions before I'd decided to take them. On a Tuesday morning, David_Chin_2024 posted about expecting to see the Monitor at the coffee shop around 3 p.m. because she seemed like she was having a stressful week and would probably want extra caffeine. I had no plans to go to the coffee shop that day. I wasn't having a particularly stressful week, and I didn't usually buy coffee in the afternoon. But at 2:45 p.m., I suddenly felt an urge for coffee and decided to walk to the shop on the ground floor of my building. When I arrived, David_Chin_2024 was sitting at a corner table with his phone out, apparently photographing or filming my arrival. He looked exactly like the profile photos from his social media account, but when I approached him to ask about the posts that mentioned me, he seemed genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "I don't post about other people on social media. I mostly just share photos of my food and complain about work." I showed him screenshots of his posts that referenced me and my activities. He studied them carefully, seeming increasingly disturbed. "This is definitely my account," he said, "but I didn't write these posts. I would remember posting about someone I'd been observing." We spent the next 20 minutes going through his social media history on his phone. The posts about me were definitely there, published from his account, but he had no memory of creating them. "Look at the timestamps," he said. "These were all posted between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. I'm always asleep during those hours." According to David, Someone was accessing his social media accounts during overnight hours and creating posts about me using his identity. But the posts demonstrated knowledge of my activities that he claimed not to have. I asked him about the post predicting I would come to the coffee shop. "I didn't write that," he said. "But I did have a weird dream last night about someone coming to this coffee shop looking stressed and needing to talk to me. When you walked in, it felt like déjà vu. Either David was lying about creating the posts, or someone was manipulating his social media accounts and somehow influencing his dreams or subconscious expectations about my behavior." I left the coffee shop more confused than ever, but also more determined to figure out what was happening. I started using social media monitoring tools to track all the accounts that had posted about me, watching for patterns in their posting behavior and timing. What I discovered was that the surveillance posts were always created during my work hours, between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. Someone was using multiple social media accounts to document my activities, then timing the posts to coincide with my content moderation shifts, so I would encounter them while working. But the surveillance wasn't limited to posts I was assigned to moderate. When I searched for my apartment address, workplace, and daily locations across social media platforms, I found hundreds of additional posts that weren't being flagged for content review. People were posting photos of my building from different angles, sharing observations about my schedule, discussing my apparent work situation, and speculating about my personal life. The posts were spread across dozens of platforms and created by hundreds of different accounts. I was the subject of comprehensive social media surveillance involving what appeared to be thousands of people documenting and sharing information about my daily activities. But when I tried to trace the accounts creating these posts, I found something that made everything infinitely more confusing. Most of the accounts were legitimate profiles belonging to real people who claimed to have no knowledge of posting about me. I contacted Sarah_K_98 through direct messages, asking about her posts that reference my activities. She responded within hours, seeming genuinely confused and concerned. "I've never posted about anyone matching your description," she wrote. "I don't even live in your city. But looking at my posting history, there are definitely posts I don't remember writing." Sarah sent me screenshots of her account showing posts about me that she claimed not to have created. The posts were definitely published from her account, but she had no memory of writing them and no knowledge of the information they contained. "It's like someone else has been using my account to post about your life," she wrote. "But I'm the only one with access to my login credentials." I spent the following week contacting dozens of people whose accounts had posted surveillance content about me. The responses were consistent. Everyone recognized their accounts and confirmed the posts had been published under their names, but no one remembered creating content about me. Either hundreds of people were lying about their social media activity, or someone was accessing multiple accounts and creating posts about me using other people's identities. But the posts contained real-world information that suggested genuine surveillance, not just random content creation. I decided to set up security cameras around my apartment and daily locations to see if I could identify who was actually conducting the surveillance that was being documented in social media posts. What the cameras captured was far more disturbing than organized stalking. The recordings showed me taking photos and videos of my own activities, then posting them to social media using accounts I didn't recognize. In the surveillance footage, I would leave my apartment, walk to various locations around the city, then stop periodically to photograph myself from different angles. I would take pictures of my apartment building, my car, the inside of shops I visited, and even record videos of myself going about daily activities. But the person in the surveillance footage didn't look like someone being forced or coerced. They moved with purpose and familiarity, like someone who had been documenting their own activities for a long time. The most disturbing part was watching myself log into social media accounts I didn't recognize and post the surveillance content using identities that belonged to other people. I was apparently operating dozens of fake social media profiles, creating comprehensive documentation of my own daily activities, then submitting this content for moderation, so I would encounter it during my work shifts. I was stalking myself and making myself review the evidence. But the person in the surveillance recordings looked completely different from how I felt while performing these activities. They appeared confident, purposeful, and aware of what they were doing, while I had no conscious memory of any of this behavior. I was living a double life, consciously believing I was a victim of social media surveillance while unconsciously orchestrating the entire operation myself. The final piece of the puzzle came when I found recordings of myself setting up the content moderation job with Digital Community Solutions. The surveillance footage showed me creating the company website, establishing the payment systems, designing the moderation dashboard, and preparing the content cues that would ensure I encountered my own surveillance posts during work hours. I had created my own employment to give myself access to the social media surveillance I was creating about myself. But why would I design such an elaborate system of self-surveillance? The answer came from examining the content more carefully. The social media posts weren't just documenting my daily activities. They were building a comprehensive profile of someone experiencing increasing paranoia and social isolation. The posts tracked my changing behavior over time, noting when I seemed stressed, when I altered my routines, when I appeared to be avoiding social contact. They documented the progression of someone developing psychological symptoms related to feeling watched and monitored. I was creating evidence of my own deteriorating mental health through fake social media surveillance. But unlike my previous explanations for self-inflicted psychological manipulation, I couldn't find any clear motive for wanting to appear mentally unstable. The surveillance wasn't building toward a legal defense or insurance claim or disability application. It was just comprehensive documentation of someone gradually losing their grip on reality. The more I investigated, the more I realized that the social media surveillance might not be serving any external purpose at all. What if I was simply someone who needed to feel important, significant, worthy of attention, and the elaborate surveillance network was a way to convince myself that my life was interesting enough to monitor? What if the content moderation job was just a method of ensuring I would regularly encounter evidence that people were paying attention to me, even if I had to create all the attention myself? What if this entire situation was just an elaborate form of digital self-harm, a way of generating artificial importance and manufactured drama in an otherwise mundane life? I'm writing this from a different coffee shop across town, having spent the last week trying to stay away from my usual locations and routines. But even here, I've noticed people taking photos that might include me in the background, and I've seen posts on social media that reference this exact coffee shop at times when I've been here. The surveillance seems to be continuing even though I've stopped actively participating in creating it. Either other people have taken over the social media monitoring operation I started, or I'm still unconsciously documenting my own activities and just can't remember doing it. Or maybe the surveillance was never really about me at all. Maybe I'm just someone who spends so much time online that I've started to see patterns and connections that don't actually exist. Maybe the references to my life in social media posts are just coincidence and confirmation bias, not evidence of organized monitoring. Maybe the entire thing is just occupational paranoia from spending too many hours reviewing social media content and seeing threats where none exist. But I checked my bank account this morning, and I'm still receiving payments from Digital Community Solutions for content moderation, work I can't remember performing. According to my work logs, I completed a full 8-hour shift last night, reviewing and moderating hundreds of flagged posts. I have no memory of working last night. I thought I spent the entire evening here at this coffee shop, writing this account and trying to figure out what's real. But there are dozens of new social media posts from today that mention seeing the night shift girl at this exact coffee shop, describing my clothes, my laptop, and even referencing the fact that I've been writing something that looks like a long document. I'm going to close my laptop now and go home, but I'm afraid of what I might find when I check my social media accounts tonight. I thought I understood human suffering before I started working the night shift crisis hotline. 3 months later, I'm not sure I understand anything anymore, including whether I'm helping people or making everything worse. I need to write this down before I completely lose track of what's real and what's coming through these phone calls. The job with National Crisis Support seemed like meaningful work when I applied 4 months ago. Remote crisis counseling, midnight to 8 a.m., providing emotional support and suicide prevention services to people calling during their darkest hours. The training was comprehensive: de-escalation techniques, active listening skills, resource referral protocols, and crisis intervention procedures. Crisis hotlines receive the most calls during overnight hours when people are alone with their thoughts and regular mental health services aren't available. My job was to provide immediate emotional support, assess suicide risk, and connect callers with appropriate resources. The work was challenging but felt genuinely important. For the first month, the calls were exactly what I expected from crisis counseling work. People struggling with depression, anxiety, relationship problems, financial stress, and suicidal thoughts. I'd listen, provide emotional validation, teach coping strategies, and help callers develop safety plans for getting through immediate crises. Most calls lasted between 20 and 40 minutes. I'd document each interaction, note the caller's risk level, record any referrals I provided, and move on to the next person who needed help. The work was emotionally demanding but manageable with proper self-care and regular supervision. But sometime in November, I started receiving calls that made me question everything I thought I knew about crisis counseling. The first unusual call came from a woman who said her name was Sarah, calling from a phone number that showed up as disconnected when I tried to verify it in our system. She was crying, describing severe depression and isolation, but something about her voice made me pay closer attention than usual. "I've been calling crisis lines for months," she said, "but the counselors all sound the same. They use the same phrases, ask the same questions, give the same responses. It's like talking to recordings instead of real people." I assured her that I was a real person and asked her to tell me more about what was making her feel suicidal tonight. "That's exactly what they all say," she replied. "Word for word. I'm a real person. Tell me what's making you feel suicidal tonight. Do you people all read from the same script?" I wasn't reading from a script, but I realized that crisis counselors are trained to use similar language and techniques, so our responses might sound standardized to frequent callers. I understand that talking to multiple counselors might make the conversations feel repetitive, I said, but I want to focus on how you're feeling right now in this moment. Sarah laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. There it is again. Focus on how you're feeling right now in this moment. That's the third time I've heard that exact phrase tonight. You've called other crisis lines tonight? I've called 6 different numbers in the past 4 hours. Different organizations, different cities, supposedly different counselors. But I keep getting the same person. I don't understand what you mean. I keep getting you, Jessica. Same voice, same responses, same counseling techniques. It's like you're the only person working every crisis hotline in the country. My name is Jessica, but callers aren't supposed to know crisis counselors' names. We're trained to maintain anonymity and professional boundaries. I'd never told Sarah my name, and it wasn't information she could have accessed through normal channels. "How do you know my name?" I asked. "Because we've talked 5 times tonight, Jessica. You keep pretending you don't remember our previous conversations, but I recognize your voice perfectly." I checked my call log for the evening. Sarah's number didn't appear anywhere in my records, and I was certain I'd never spoken to her before this call. "I think there might be some confusion," I said. "This is the first time we've spoken tonight." "Then explain this," Sarah said, and I heard her playing back a recording of a phone conversation. It was definitely my voice, having a crisis counseling conversation with someone who sounded exactly like Sarah, using the exact same phrases and responses I'd just used with her. But according to my call log and my memory, that conversation had never happened. Sarah played 3 more recordings of conversations between her and someone with my voice, all supposedly from earlier that night, all involving me providing crisis counseling services I had no memory of delivering. "I've been documenting this for weeks," Sarah said. "Crisis hotlines across the country are all answered by the same person pretending to be different counselors. You're the only crisis counselor in America, Jessica, and you're having the same conversations with the same people over and over without remembering any of it." I ended the call and immediately contacted my supervisor, but the National Crisis Support main number went straight to voicemail. I tried emailing the supervision team, but my messages bounced back as undeliverable. When I tried to research National Crisis Support online, I couldn't find any information about the organization. No website, no business registration, no professional licensing information. But I was receiving paychecks for crisis counseling work from an organization that didn't seem to exist. Over the following weeks, I started receiving more calls from people who claimed to recognize my voice from previous conversations I couldn't remember having. A man named David said he'd been calling crisis lines for months and always reached me, regardless of which number he dialed. He'd started keeping detailed notes about our conversations, and according to his records, I'd helped him develop the same safety plan 17 different times. A woman named Maria played back recordings of conversations with me from different crisis hotlines, spanning 6 months of calls where I'd provided identical counseling responses to the same recurring crisis situations. The callers weren't angry or accusatory. They seemed concerned about me, worried that I was experiencing memory problems or working excessive hours without proper rest. "You sound exhausted every time we talk," David told me, "and you never remember helping me before, even when I referenced specific advice you gave me last week." But I had no memory of previous conversations with any of these people. According to my records, every call was a first-time interaction with a new caller seeking crisis support. I started recording my own crisis counseling sessions to compare with the recordings callers were playing back to me. What I discovered was disturbing in ways I'm still trying to process. The recordings of my voice that callers played back to me were definitely me, but they contained conversations I had no memory of having. The content was consistent with my counseling style and training, but the specific interactions had never happened according to my conscious memory. Either I was experiencing severe memory loss regarding my crisis counseling work, or someone was using advanced voice synthesis technology to create fake recordings of me providing counseling services. But the fake recordings, if that's what they were, contained detailed knowledge of crisis counseling techniques, specific information about callers' situations, and responses that demonstrated genuine therapeutic skill. Someone would need comprehensive access to my professional training, my personal counseling style, and detailed information about the people calling crisis lines to create such convincing fake recordings. I decided to set up comprehensive monitoring of my work activities to track every call I received and every response I provided during my crisis counseling shifts. What the monitoring revealed was far more disturbing than memory gaps or voice synthesis fraud. The recordings showed me having extended conversations with callers during hours when I thought I was taking breaks, sleeping, or off duty. According to the monitoring equipment, I was providing crisis counseling services almost continuously, even during times when I believed I wasn't working. But the person in the recordings sounded tired, mechanical, and increasingly detached from the conversations, as if they were going through the motions of crisis counseling without genuine emotional engagement. The most disturbing discovery was that I was having the same conversations repeatedly with the same callers, but treating each interaction as if it were the first time we'd spoken. David would call describing his depression and suicidal thoughts, and I would provide crisis intervention using identical language and techniques I'd used with him dozens of times before. But in every conversation, I acted like I was meeting him for the first time. Maria would describe her anxiety and panic attacks, and I would teach her the same breathing exercises and coping strategies I'd taught her in dozens of previous calls. But I never acknowledged our previous interactions or built on the work we'd supposedly done together. I was providing crisis counseling services with no continuity or memory of previous therapeutic relationships. But what made everything infinitely more confusing was discovering that the callers were also repeating themselves with no apparent memory of our previous conversations. David would describe his depression using identical language each time he called, mentioning the same triggering events, expressing the same suicidal thoughts, asking for the same type of help. Maria would have panic attacks during our calls, but the panic always followed the same pattern, peaked at the same intensity, and responded to the same interventions in the same timeline. The callers seemed to be stuck in loops, repeatedly experiencing the same crises and seeking the same help, just like I was stuck providing the same responses without remembering previous interactions. I started analyzing the patterns more systematically, tracking the timing and content of calls over several weeks. What I found suggested something far more disturbing than memory problems or repetitive callers. The crisis counseling calls were following a predetermined script, not an obvious script that counselors read from, but a subtle pattern where callers would present specific types of crises at predictable times, and I would provide responses that followed a consistent therapeutic progression. David always called at 1:17 a.m. with depression related to work stress. Maria always called at 3:33 a.m. with panic attacks triggered by relationship anxiety. Sarah always called at 5:45 a.m. with suicidal thoughts related to social isolation. The calls came in the same order, at the same times, with the same emotional content, every single night. Either I was experiencing such severe psychological disturbance that I was hallucinating repetitive crisis counseling scenarios, or someone was orchestrating elaborate fake crisis calls designed to make me believe I was losing my memory. But the callers' emotional distress seemed genuine. Their tears, their fear, their desperation all felt real, even if the content of their crises was repetitive. I decided to break the pattern by providing different responses to familiar callers, trying to determine if they were real people or some kind of artificial system. When David called with his usual depression concerns, I asked him about topics we'd supposedly discussed in previous calls. He had no memory of previous conversations and seemed genuinely confused when I referenced therapeutic work we'd supposedly done together. When Maria called with her panic attack, I tried using different coping techniques than I'd used in previous sessions. She responded as if experiencing these interventions for the first time, with no recognition of alternative strategies I'd taught her before. The callers seemed to have no continuity of memory, just like I apparently had no memory of previous interactions with them. We were all trapped in some kind of therapeutic loop where the same crisis counseling scenarios played out repeatedly, without any of the participants remembering previous iterations. The breakthrough came when I received a call that shattered everything I thought I understood about my work and my own identity. The caller identified herself as Jessica Martinez, crisis counselor, calling the crisis line because she was experiencing severe anxiety about her work. It was my own voice calling me for crisis counseling. I've been working crisis hotlines for months, she said, but I'm starting to lose track of my conversations with callers. I feel like I'm having the same interactions over and over, but I can't remember the details. I'm worried I'm not providing effective help anymore. I was listening to myself describe the exact problems I'd been experiencing, but the call was coming from outside my own phone system. This is very confusing, I said. I think there might be some kind of technical error. No error, my own voice replied. I'm a crisis counselor just like you, and I need help dealing with work-related stress. Isn't that what crisis lines are for? I spent the next hour providing crisis counseling to myself, listening to my own voice describe concerns and fears that perfectly matched what I'd been experiencing. But the person with my voice seemed to have no awareness that we were the same person. She talked about her work as a crisis counselor, like it was completely separate from my work as a crisis counselor. At the end of the call, I asked her what name she wanted me to use for follow-up documentation. Jessica Martinez, she said, but don't worry about follow-up. I'll probably just call again tomorrow night if I'm still feeling anxious about work. After she hung up, I sat staring at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. Either I had just provided crisis counseling to myself without recognizing my own voice, or someone with access to my voice and personal information was calling crisis lines pretending to be me. But if someone was impersonating me, why would they call the same crisis line where I worked? And why would they describe problems that perfectly matched my own psychological state? I started reviewing all my crisis counseling recordings, looking for other instances of providing services to callers who might have been versions of myself. What I found was that roughly half the people I'd been counseling had problems, voices, and personal details that were variations of my own life and concerns. David's depression related to night shift work. Maria's anxiety about feeling isolated during overnight hours. Sarah's despair about providing emotional support to others while receiving none herself. They were all aspects of my own psychological state, calling for crisis counseling from different phone numbers, but describing challenges that perfectly reflected what I was experiencing as a night shift crisis counselor. I had been providing therapy to different versions of myself without recognizing the pattern. But the most disturbing realization was that I wasn't just counseling myself. I was also receiving counseling from myself. When I reviewed the recordings more carefully, I found evidence that I had been calling crisis lines as a client, describing my work-related stress and psychological concerns to counselors who sounded exactly like me. I was both providing and receiving crisis counseling services, apparently without conscious awareness of either role. The monitoring equipment revealed that during my work shifts, I would alternate between taking crisis calls and making crisis calls, switching between counselor and client identities seamlessly. But in both roles, I seemed to have no memory of the other identity or awareness that I was essentially providing therapy to myself through an elaborate system of multiple phone lines and fictional personas. I had created an entire crisis counseling network where I was the only counselor and the only client, having therapeutic conversations with myself using different names and phone numbers. But why would I create such an elaborate system of self-therapy? The answer became clear when I realized that the crisis counseling conversations were actually helping. Even though I was essentially talking to myself, the therapeutic process was providing genuine emotional support and psychological relief. The act of expressing my concerns as a client and then providing professional responses as a counselor was meeting legitimate therapeutic needs. I had unknowingly developed a sophisticated method of self-therapy that allowed me to process work-related stress and emotional isolation through structured therapeutic conversations. But the system only worked because I remained unconscious of its true nature. Once I became aware that I was both counselor and client, the therapeutic value would be compromised. I'm writing this from my apartment at 4 a.m., having not logged into the crisis counseling system for 3 days. But every night around midnight, I feel an almost irresistible urge to start taking calls from people who need help. And every night around 3 a.m., I feel an equally strong urge to call a crisis line because I'm feeling overwhelmed by work-related anxiety and social isolation. The psychological needs that drove me to create the elaborate self-therapy system haven't disappeared just because I understand what I was doing. I still need emotional support for the stress of crisis counseling work. I still need someone to talk to about the isolation of night shift employment. I still need therapeutic intervention for the psychological impact of constantly hearing about other people's suffering. But now I know that the only person available to provide that support is me. I think I'm going to log into the crisis counseling system tonight. Someone named Sarah is probably going to call around 5:45 a.m., feeling desperate and suicidal and needing someone to talk her through the crisis. And I'm going to help her, because that's what crisis counselors do. Even if Sarah is me, and even if I'm the one who needs help getting through the night, maybe especially then,